That's the best I can do.
Yeah, the sound just completely cut out, so I couldn't actually hear how well you were doing.
You go, you do it. God, that's actually horrendous. That's actually a horrendous way to start the podcast. Welcome along, everybody, to Spooktober!
To the horrendous cast.
Spooktober, but also Cult Popture, but also film franchise Fortnights on the Cult Popture podcast during Spooktober.
You're blowing my fucking mind right here, AJ.
The intro music you will have just heard before I went, and before Richard went, was, of course, by our good friend Carlisle, and is the theme music to my latest short film, You're the Killer. So check that out. There's a link in the show notes. There was a very fun piece of music too. He created it, but I hummed it to him, and that was a very special moment for me because I feel like I've made music.
Was it a special moment for Carlisle?
Well, that's up to him. That's what he needs to tell us.
Okay,
And
right.
I hope he listens to this episode so that he knows that I want to hear him say that. So this is Film Franchise Fortnights, where we watch a different film franchise every fortnight. My name is AJ, and I'm joined by Richard on this little Zoom call that took a little bit longer than usual to get working.
And I'm still contemplating, do I restart my computer?
Really?
Well,
what's going on?
I don't know. Has it just been so goddamn long since we've recorded a podcast that I've forgotten what my waveform is supposed to look like? But at the same time, and here's a compliment, I trust you implicitly with the editing of the podcast.
You listened back to it before and it sounded normal?
Well, I don't normally listen back to it. It sounded very quiet, but we record these very quietly.
Is your project rate set to 100 hertz? Are you on Windows Wasapi?
Yes.
And it's going through your UMC.
My correct microphone. It's doing everything
you got
right.
4 channels going?
4 channels.
I've stopped being in podcast mode. You've continued. I went into behind the scenes voice, but you stayed in character.
Well,
so I guess it's staying in.
It's staying in.
Do you want to stop and just listen back to this, just in case?
No.
All right, we're back, everybody. A brief hiatus,
We're
invisible
back.
to you, the listener. What have I explained so far? It's Spooktober, so we're doing horror movie franchises.
It's Spooktober. You did those weird moans at the start as well.
How dare you? I will make it explicitly clear in the edit that it was you doing those. Welcome along to Spooktober, where we exclusively do spooky things and cover exclusively spooky franchises. And Richard, our first franchise for Spooktober 2022 is Psycho. It's not just It is Psycho, but it is also literally.
It's not.
It's sweet, but it's Psycho. It's left, but it's right though. You know how it goes.
Ooh.
Is
that a me without you look?
No. Who was that even by? I don't even know.
Okay.
Sweet, but Psycho. I spelt Sweet Nuts Bico. It is by Ava Max. All right, so it is not that. No, Psycho, Richard, is a film and then 5 other films in that series. So for a total of 6 films, including a non-canonical TV movie, a remake, and then just also 3 other sequels released between 1960 and 1998. The first film in the series, Psycho, is of course a classic of cinema, a black and white thriller directed by maybe the heaviest of Hollywood heavyweights, and that was a comment on his stature, not his weight. I'm not.
Okay.
Alfred Hitchcock. It is widely considered to be one of the best films ever made, and the first example, or one of the first examples, I know there's a technicality here,
Of a toilet flushing.
of what we'd now call the slasher genre, and of toilets flushing, which seemingly never came close to the same level of respectability again, you know? I don't think, Psycho was nominated for a few Oscars, but
Wow.
no one is expecting Halloween Ends to receive any nominations. You know,
Yeah, that's because it's not as good.
No, it is similar.
I mean, Get Out. It's not a slasher.
Yeah, but is that a slasher? Yeah, horror can sometimes make it up there, but slashers, not so much.
You bet your sweet bippy they can't.
You sound like Norman Bates on drugs saying that. You bet your sweet bippy you can.
God, all this work to get my microphone sounding crisp, and then the things I say into it, I just ridiculed for entertainment.
The Psycho series and its sequels specifically, I thought was similar to Jaws. It's a film revolutionary, considered one of the greats, and yet, as we were just saying, the films made in its legacy are almost never spoken about in high society film circles. Another way, yeah. What other cool words that I've never used out loud before could be?
It's what's the word they say in the fourth one?
Inordinate.
Yeah.
Not inordinately. And another way that the Psycho series is similar to Jaws is that its sequels are maybe some of film franchise canon's most obscure, having made virtually no mainstream impact in the cultural zeitgeist. Most people these days probably don't even know what they're about, and many won't even know they exist. I reckon before we covered it for Film Franchise Fortnights, if you'd asked me how many Psycho movies there are, I would have said, well, I know there's the remake, so 2? But we now
you'd
do
written
know
4 on the franchise list, and we now know that there is
6.
6.
So I didn't know what I was talking about.
Yeah, dumb
so
fuck.
we do know they exist now, and the first film, which will take up probably a lot more time to talk about than any of the other films in the series, was of course called Psycho. It came out in 1960, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, based on the novel by Robert Bloch. That's Bloch with a H, not a K. So Bloch, maybe, but I doubt, because it doesn't have a T before the C. Bloch. Robert Bloch. What do you think it has on Rotten Tomatoes?
100.
Pretty much. It's got 96% on Rotten Tomatoes. And can you tell me, and spoilers for a very old film with a very famous spoiler in it, can you tell me what Psycho is about?
Our hero, Marion Crane, has stolen all this money and then goes, I gotta get the hell out of Dodge, and flees the cops, and then settles down at what appears to be your average run-of-the-mill hotel. But
not inordinately creepy or anything.
Not inordinately, not in an
not
inordinate way.
No.
And she meets the friendly owner of the hotel, Norman Bates. They share a dinner together of sandwiches and milk.
Should have known there.
And he talks about his dearest mother, who sounds like she's got a bit of a jealous streak. Now, after this creepy conversation, which also mentions taxidermy as Norman's primary hobby, she slips into the shower, and then the slipping continues because she's stabbed a bunch by an unknown figure, and then slips over because of the water
and blood
and viscera, I presume.
And roll credits. I assume you've just told us the whole
story.
Well,
our hero has died inordinately, and so
do we know what inordinately? Because they say it in the first one as well. Can we? I'm gonna look up define.
It's like an exceptionally large, or like
okay, unusually or disproportionately large, excessive.
Yeah, okay. Excessive is a good word. But no, so obviously this hot young piece of ass, Marion Crane, has gone missing. And so, as we all know, when a white woman goes missing, there's a whole big media storm surrounding it. So they go to investigate the Bates Motel. And
It's funny you would specify a media storm, which they deliberately go out of their way to not have in this movie, because they don't go to the police because she stole money, so they're hoping that, the person she stole money from is willing to forgive if her sister and her secret lover can figure out where she's gone.
To rebut that, I would say they made a movie about it, though.
That's very true.
So,
Good
and
point.
it's often considered one of the greatest of all time, as you said. But yeah, they investigate, and then they find out, spoilers for Psycho, that Norman Bates has actually been doing the killings, which were up until now seen as being performed by a feminine figure, presumably his mother he's been talking to. But even bigger twist, his mum's dead. She real dead. She a dead old
He
lady.
killed her.
In fact, he was the one that did it.
He's the one that did it!
And then there's the original title. And just such a massive spoiler for the film. And
Do not tell anyone what happens in He's the One That Did It.
He's the one that did it's a good name for a horror movie.
Totally.
But
it's
anyway,
like John dies at the end.
Yeah. And so, yeah, he turns out he is essentially like a split personality, and when he's killing people as mother, he genuinely believes that he is his mother.
Yes, correct. What did you think of this film? Had you seen it before?
Well, no, I hadn't seen it before.
Wow.
I
Big
own
horror,
it.
a big movie buff like you? Never seen Psycho?
Yeah.
Never seen Psycho?
Well, AJ, have you seen it before?
No, I'd not seen it properly before either.
Big movie buff like you.
You think you're being funny, do you?
Yeah, so yeah, I'd never seen Psycho. It slipped me by. I have it on DVD. I bought a matching DVDs of the original and the remake, and
nice.
never watched them. But I was fascinated by the idea of it when I bought the DVD, and yeah. As a movie, though, yeah, it is pretty good. It's interesting watching a movie like this and being like, yeah, no, I dig it. But the thing about it that interested me the most is that I feel like I'd seen this entire film already. So many scenes from this I've actually seen the actual scene. Other bits I've seen parodied endlessly. Other things you just pick up.
It's one of those movies.
Quotes through your life, and you pick up, the character names and everything like that, and the plot. And I probably could have recited the plot more or less the same 2 weeks ago. But the one thing that that I never understood was the final line of the film, and I knew what the final line of the film was. Do you want to say it? Because I misquoted it earlier.
Oh, what is it? That I couldn't even hurt a fly?
No, they'll look at her, and I'm not even going to swat that fly. And they'll look at me, and they'll say, "Look, she wouldn't even harm a fly." And I was like, "Who's talking in this scenario?" And I knew that he dressed up as his mum and committed the murders, but I didn't understand. I think I never found out the whole
split personality.
The split personality thing, that he genuinely believes he's the mother, and that the meaning of that ending is that she's still in there somewhere.
Right, yeah, rattling around, not swatting flies like a evil witch.
Like some kind of
crazy
sociopath.
I love the joke of when a movie is called an adjective and you use synonyms for that adjective the whole way through. Like some kind of insane loopy nut job. I had never really seen Psycho before, but
get a new experience.
I felt like I could probably recite it. I remember a flatmate putting it on a few years back, and I was in and out of the room, and I wrote it off as boring from the snippet that I saw, because the snippet that I saw was Marion Crane driving around and getting a new car. So I think if you only had seen that scene, you'd just be like, what the hell is this?
This shouldn't be called Psycho. This should be called Marion Crane drives around and gets a new car.
For a long time, I thought that was what the whole movie was more or less like.
About.
Though I did know, of course, about the midpoint twist, the shower scene, along with Bernard Herrmann's iconic score. I'd have probably said, like you, that I could recite the film, that I'd basically seen the entire film, having been exposed to it so much. But none of the twists and turns really surprised me. But I did not know how little of the film I had seen between Marion's murder and Norman's capture. There's a whole movie in there where they're trying to figure out
half of the movie Psycho.
Yeah, there's specifically half of the movie Psycho. Like, I didn't know what happened after the shower scene. Like, I didn't know that there was a detective involved.
I thought it was one of those things that, people are like, yeah, it's the midpoint of the movie, and it's like, you say it's the midpoint, but there's probably like 20 minutes left.
Yeah. But no, it's actually before halfway. Yeah. It's like there's more of the movie after the shower scene than before it. I really loved it though, and I can totally appreciate a lot of the artistry going on in every aspect of the film. It is very much the kind of thing that it's very feels very intentional. Every bit of lighting, every shot, every sound effect feels very crafted.
It actually wasn't though. If you look behind the scenes. And most of the stuff just happened, and they happened to be filming.
Crazy. That is psycho. That is psycho that happened. It was well on its way to a predictable 5 stars for me, Richard, but then the second to last scene of the film involves a psychiatrist explaining Norman's psychosis to everyone using a very outdated term, which we won't say.
What is
it? You know the word. The word that means when someone is dressing up
the one
like
from Rocky
their
Horror.
mother. Yeah, there you go. This just absolutely tanked the momentum for me. I can only assume that like audiences in 1960 weren't as accustomed to like a split personality situation in their stories.
Well, if
because
you don't
it all
explain it, they would just walk out of the cinema being like, so what, he was just some kind of psycho, and we're just supposed to buy that.
I just like he talks for probably like 3 minutes explaining the split
It's actually the
personality
midpoint of the film.
And it took the film down half a star for me. I just thought it was unnecessary and over expository, and I don't know. I didn't like it. I'm
sorry, AJ. I like to understand my films.
Despite now being recognised as Hitchcock's best, though, if not his most well-known film, Psycho was not initially a unanimous hit with critics, nor was it a slam dunk. It actually came much later in his career than I realised. This was
it was actually an alley-oop.
Thank you. This was actually comparatively one of the last films he directed. He only directed like maybe 10 more after this, which is like 10. Wow. That's an entire director's career. But Hitchcock, I don't know if you've seen his Wikipedia page, but this guy directed like 100 films. So I was surprised that it wasn't like the one that put him on the map, I guess.
Yeah. It's also like, I think that just in our minds, we, assume that it's like, it's black and white, so it's one of his old ones. But like, Rear Window came out before this, and that's in color.
Yep. Just before this film was North by Northwest and Vertigo, two very lush Technicolor films. And a big reason for this was that Psycho was actually made for a much smaller budget, and it employed the team behind Hitchcock's TV series Alfred Hitchcock Presents instead of more expensive film crews. And this was done because Paramount hated the story. They thought it was grotesque. They thought it was disgusting. They thought it was too far, and they refused to finance the film, so Hitchcock had to fund it himself. I think it did get distribution through Paramount, but they were like, we want no part of this, so you take the whole box office, you idiot. You've made such a dud. And of course, he did not make a dud, and had the box office all to himself, basically. So,
got him.
And like, I feel like when we discuss things like spoilers, that feels like it's a very modern thing. It feels like it's a very modern thing to be like, do not spoil what happens in Avengers Endgame.
Don't spoil the end game.
Yeah.
Don't spoil it, darling.
This was...
That was genuinely like they had the hashtag for...
Oh, did they?
At the Don't Worry Darling like premiere. The hashtag
nice.
Don't Spoil It, Darling.
So this was...
Spoilers sucks.
This film came out in 1960, and not only was there an anti-spoiler campaign for it, it was most of the marketing. First of all, he purchased the film rights for $9,500. I don't know how much that is now, but that's all it cost at the time. And then reportedly attempted to buy every copy of the novel in the world so that no one could read it ahead of time and see what would happen. Janet Leigh and Anthony Perkins, who play Marion Crane, and Norman Bates were forbidden from doing a press tour, and Hitchcock just did it himself. So he was doing radio interviews because he didn't want anyone to unguarded slip what the movie was about. And the trailer for this movie is kind of iconic. It's a 6-minute trailer, which is just Hitchcock walking around the set talking about how bananas this film is, and then nearly spoiling it, and then being like, oh no, I'm not going to spoil it. There were posters made up. You've probably seen some of these if you're any kind of internet historian.
If you're any kind of man.
There's one I really like, which is Hitchcock pointing to his watch, and then it says beside it, "It is required that you see Psycho from the very beginning. The next showing of Psycho begins at," and then there's a little whiteboard where you write the time. And then it says, "The manager of this theatre has been instructed at the risk of his life not to admit to the theatre any persons after the picture starts. Any spurious attempts to enter by side doors, fire escapes, or ventilating shafts will be met by force. The entire objective of this extraordinary policy, of course, is to help you enjoy Psycho more." There's also another poster that says, "After you see Psycho, don't give away the ending. It's the only one we have." It's pretty fun. These would be great posters to just have hanging in your man cave, you know.
Oh yeah, hell yeah! and then I put the next screening starts at 69.
Yeah, 6:90, 6:90 p.m.
Yeah. Don't spoil how it ends.
A big change from the original novel is one of the most famous elements of the film. I thought this was pretty interesting. Is that Marion Crane isn't red herring the main character of the story.
Oh, what colour hair does she have?
I don't know if it says, but in the novel, her story only takes up about 2 out of the 17 chapters, while the film instead tricks you into thinking she's the protagonist until her death at nearly halfway through. What do you think about this famous twist? Do you have any Richardian observations?
Do I have any what observations?
Richardian.
Oh, nice. What would you consider a Richardian observation?
I could never make one up because they're inherently you.
No, but from a previous podcast.
I hate how you've thrown a question back onto me after I've thrown.
I feel like I do this a lot.
You never tell me the Rotten Tomato scores. You say, "What would you guess?" I can't think of one. I can't think of a Richardian observation. I've lied.
Well, that's because they don't exist.
It's like pornography. You'll know it when you see it. Wait, is that the line?
Yeah. So the twist of Janet Leigh, Marion Crane, Jamie Lee Curtis's mother, dying midway through Psycho.
Yeah, that one
is something that I've
got a bit of an interesting perspective on.
Yeah, no, I like it as a. I mean, it's one of those things that's it's hard because it is so well endowed into pop culture until now. But I think the thing is that I'd heard for so long you think she's the main character until she dies, but I didn't realize how much the plot really is entirely her.
I mean, it's still she still kind of is the main character after her death in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's not like a case of a final girl where they say I could see someone in the window through a crack in my curtain, my blind, and I thought, you know what? I don't want them seeing me, so I just... Anywho, but yeah, that it's like the movie's not about Norman or anything until quite late into the movie.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a whole movie's worth of plot set up already.
And it's not quite like a compelling plot as well. Like,
she buys a
money,
new car.
Buys a new car.
But yeah, that it really is like a shock. But I mean, it shouldn't be called Psycho.
What should it be called?
He's the one who did it.
Oh, right. Because then you'd start the movie being like, the main character's a woman. What do they mean by he?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Like, it would be cool if this was like... I mean, I guess it wasn't marketed as a horror, really. It was just marketed as a...
Something Happens, I believe, was another good title for any movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you feel about it?
I like it. I'm trying to think. I feel like I've seen things replicated, though I can't think of a perfect example of like a main character dying halfway through a movie.
Joe, I did it in one of my film school projects, and
oh really?
I got told it was a bad idea.
Derivative of Psycho, they said, and then the next person came in and they were like, "This is derivative of Psycho," because they're at film school.
Yeah.
No, I think it's great. I think as well it doesn't. It's a character death and a main character death, which then leads to a satisfying story, and it's not like the film loses something when she's gone. And so I think it's handled quite well. In the novel, I read that that the novel makes it so that a lot of a character will die and then a new one comes along and you think, well, they're the main character now, and then they die as well. And that does sort of happen in this with Abergast, the detective, who I didn't know died. And so I was like, well, this is obviously our new hero, and then he died, and I was like, well, I don't know what's happening.
Well, I'm just going to stop trying to predict you, movie.
Yes,
because
exactly.
you win this round, Hitchcock.
Yeah. It is believed that around 60 shots were used for the famous shower scene, though there are some who believe that there are more. I don't know how this isn't an objective thing that you could just figure out. But there is even a documentary called 7852, the Hitchcock shower scene, named for the believed 78 shots and 52 edits that the guy who made the documentary thought were in that scene. It's a whole documentary about the scene, presumably. The famous music, the wah, 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 that was made by Bernard Herrmann, and he convinced Hitchcock that music would intensify the scene, because that music doesn't really play anywhere else. I think it's maybe in the title sequence, but that was probably put in after.
It plays a lot in the remake.
Yeah, it does. So Herrmann convinced Hitchcock that it would intensify the scene. Hitchcock originally wanted no music for that scene, which does sound one step less terrifying than the music, that like nothing in there at all. But after they put in the music, Hitchcock doubled Herrmann's salary because he was so stoked with how it came together. Other sort of like trivia things to tick off whenever you talk about Psycho. Hershey's chocolate syrup was used as blood. A stabbing of a melon was used to make the sound of a body being stabbed. Yeah, all that sort of fun filmmaking stuff.
There's no nudity, and a knife never actually pierces any skin.
Yeah, I think that was changed from an original cut where you did see a knife pierce some skin.
Yeah, there's a knife touching skin shot.
Right.
I actually think it looks pretty stupid by today's
standards.
Yeah.
Really?
A little bit.
This is a Richardian observation. Please go on.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just like it's iconic, but I guess it's seeing it in the remake, which I watched. However long this podcast is, that's how long ago I finished the film. And I think it doesn't... I mean, it's the same shots, but it doesn't work very well on it.
Well, I think
we'll talk about this more when we get to
symptom of the remake in general.
But that like... I don't know, I think that something being shot like that, it just... Because now we're so oversaturated with things being shaky cam and fast edits to hide a lack of stunt work or violence or whatever it is, that going back to this, I see it more as my modern film consuming brain sees that as lazy filmmaking.
Well, I don't think to defend Hitchcock, I don't think it is lazy filmmaking, because I think what we're watching, it's the same thing as when the MPAA forbid sex in movies, and so people would talk about, like, we're going to go ride that horse really hard, huh? You're going to ride that horse with me? Like, this is an example of where they have to show
They're riding the horse.
A naked woman being stabbed, and they can't show her nudity, and they can't show violence.
Yeah.
And I think with that in mind, it is a very creative workaround.
Well, but I've seen so many scenes censored like that.
Right, so you don't even think with that caveat that this is a particularly impressive scene.
I don't think it's an impressive scene. I just think it looks kind of silly now.
Okay. Well, did you know that in the novel she's actually decapitated?
Wow.
So I'm glad they didn't have to figure out how to film that without showing any violence, because it probably wouldn't have been quite as impactful. According to Stephen Rebello's 1990 book, Alfred Hitchcock and the Making of Psycho, the censors in charge of enforcing the production code wrangled with Hitchcock because some of them insisted they could see one of Janet Leigh's boobies. Now, we've both looked pretty hard at this film, and I think we can confirm that you can't. The production code were like, you got to take it out. Got to take it out. We don't want to see any boobies. And so they gave the reels back to Hitchcock, who did nothing to them for like 6 days, then handed them back. They watched the exact same film, and they were like, yep, no, that's fine now. You've
Everyone who works for the censorship board is stupid.
The board was also upset with the racy opening with Janet Leigh in a bra, so Hitchcock said that if they let him keep the shower scene, he would reshoot the opening with the board on set, and no one showed up. So he was like, all right, well, we're not reshooting it, and the topless wearing a bra opening scene stayed. As we said, this is one of the first times a flushing toilet was seen in the film. In the novel, one of her earrings is found next to the toilet. The screenwriter for this film, Joseph Stefano, was like, all right, we'll have her flush away a note she writes down, and that way the toilet is integral to the plot, and we won't be able to cut a flushing toilet out, which is so funny to think of, like, filmmakers as being that rebellious that they're going to these lengths to include, of all things, a flushing toilet still in the film.
Yeah. And how far we've come that, a mere 38 years later, there's a butthole in the movie.
We will get to the butthole.
That's all I want to talk about.
Well, Richard, if you go on IMDb Trivia and look up Psycho, you will be inundated with probably, I would guess, up to 5,000 entries for a single film. And a lot of these entries are very poorly written or reveal something very stupid about the film. And I'm going to tell you some of them now in one of our favorite multi-part segments, Dumb IMDb Trivia. So these are directly lifted from IMDb. Although Norman Bates was typecasted Anthony Perkins, he said he still would have taken the role even if he knew the character would dog his career. Was this written by an Australian? Would dog his career? What a funny sentence to read on one of the most highly respected films of all. Although Norman Bates was typecast Anthony Perkins, he still said he would have taken the role even if he knew the character would dog his career.
He's dogging the boys.
He's dogging the career. On set, Sir Alfred Hitchcock would always refer to Anthony Perkins as Master Bates. Hitchcock did have the reputation for often harassing male and female cast members like this. See Tippi Hedren, Billy Mummy, etc. I think it's funny that Hitchcock would seemingly be mocking someone's name being turned into Master Bates when he made the character. We didn't make. He could,
Well, so his name is Cock in it.
That's a good point. Yeah,
I thought that's where you're going.
No, I guess that is true. If I was Anthony Perkins, I'd be like, "Your name is Coconut," and then I would just walk away.
Yeah.
After this movie's release, Sir Alfred Hitchcock received angry letters from the father of a girl who refused to have a bath after seeing Les Diaboliques, 1955, another Hitchcock film, and the child now refused to shower after seeing Psycho. Hitchcock sent a note back simply saying, "Send her to the dry cleaners." And finally, this was Sir Alfred Hitchcock's first horror movie, which I read and I was like, that's not true. That can't be true. And like what it like, you know, and he did, I would argue that Vertigo is about as scary as Psycho, I guess. Or, you know, like, I think he made dark horror-esque movies before this, but I think more what it is that this is the first horror movie, or one of, you know, what we'd call horrors. So to say this is his first one, it's like, yeah, no shit. Like, no one was doing them like this before Psycho.
Yeah.
Did you have any favourite moments or things that you really liked in this film that you wanted to discuss?
Oh, I mean, the shower scene.
I think we've discussed that just quite enough yet.
Nah, I just look at the so the book Psycho came out 14 months before the movie.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Yeah. Well, Richard, before we move on to the much lesser talked about rest of the series, we do have a question that we like to ask when we get to this point in our discussions, and that is why? But more specifically, franchise. Why did this become a franchise? And this is like, for this franchise specifically, it is a very interesting question. It's not like any, you know, a modern blockbuster franchise where it's like, well, it made a lot of money and so people clearly wanted to see it. Psycho 2 didn't come out for 22 years after this one. So, 23 years actually. 23 years. So why do you think they decided, let's give it a crack. Let's crack open
do you
the
have
Psycho
an answer to this?
I have an answer to this, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But I want to know what you think.
I presume it's Anthony Perkins went into debt or something.
That's a good guess. It's similar to some very tragic things that did happen in his life, but no, that is not why Psycho 2. He actually nearly didn't return for Psycho 2.
Wow.
No, the real reason for why Psycho 2 was made requires us to return to our old friend whose name we don't know how to pronounce, Robert Bloch, Robert Bloch, who wrote a Psycho 2 novel, which came out in 1982. However, Psycho 2 is not based off Psycho 2, the novel, because Robert Bloch's sequel novel involved Norman Bates escaping from his mental institution and traveling to Hollywood, where he attempts to stop the production of a film based on his life. Bloch was left out of the production of the sequel film and eventually felt quite bitter about this. Psycho 2, the novel, is considered immature, incoherent, and unsuitable for adaptation into motion picture. So basically, Robert Bloch wrote this novel that was like bad-mouthing slasher and horror and Hollywood, and the people who owned the film rights were like, fuck you, we're gonna make a fucking movie. So Psycho 2 was essentially made out of spite. Hitchcock had died in 1980, I think, but his daughter gave the blessing for Psycho 2. She said that Alfred would have loved it, which is a nice way to think of how Alfred Hitchcock, like, people say that about the remake as well. I think his daughter said like he would have been flattered by the remake, which is really interesting. So yeah, Psycho 2 was directed by, came out in 1983. It was directed by Richard Franklin. What do you think it has on Rotten Tomatoes?
53.
It's 61%, so just fresh. What is Psycho 2 about?
So, Norman gets out of a mental institution that he was put in, and then just is allowed to just go back to Bates Motel, which seems insane. But he gets a job as like a
kitchen hand,
a kitchen hand, and he meets a girl. You know what happens, and then murderings start happening again. and then Mother starts making a wicked voice be heard again, and yeah, that turns out that the people are trying to set up Norman.
Yeah, so he becomes quite close with a woman named Mary, who we halfway through the film we find out is actually the daughter of Marion's sister, who was a main character in the first film, and that they're basically trying to get him put back in prison by tricking him into going psycho again.
Yeah.
It backfires. A lot of fucking people fucking die in this movie. The girl dies. Lila dies. Sam's already dead, the boyfriend from the first film. And sort of a big change is it's revealed that Norma Bates, Mrs. Bates, was actually not Norman's biological mother, and at the end of the film, Norman's biological mother shows up where he kills her in almost identical fashion. He poisons her like how he poisoned his mum, and then he says, "You sure you won't have one of those sandwiches?" And she says, "What?" And then he clubs her with a shovel. And it's the only character Norman Bates kills in the film. Everyone else is killed by someone else, or dies accidentally, or things like that. Yeah. So what did you think of Psycho 2?
Well, it's I didn't love it, but I was so intrigued by the fact that this came out 23 years afterwards, because we get a lot of distant sequels nowadays, but and so what I always like to do with these, to really like cement in my mind, like for people going to see Psycho 2, how long ago it felt to go to that for the original Psycho. And Psycho seeming like this untouchable movie at the time, I was thinking back, okay, well, what would it be like if a film that came out in 1999 got a sequel now? And then I was like, well, I mean, okay, when I think 1999 films, I think The Matrix. But then that did get a sequel last year, but obviously had other sequels in between. But then I thought of what I think is probably the perfect like analogy is that if Eyes Wide Shut 2 came out this year,
right? Yeah.
That it's like this untouchable masterpiece from one of the greatest directors of all time.
His last one
that like hasn't like its legacy hasn't been ruined in any way for 22 years, and the like Eyes Wide Open coming out, and Tom Cruise is returning bizarrely.
Would it be like Eyes Wide, because Eyes Wide Open is just the phrase? Would it be Eyes Closed Open or something like that?
Yeah,
Eyes Tight Open. Yeah.
What did you think of the film?
So unlike Jaws 2, I think Psycho 2, as well as 3 and 4, are at the very least quite interesting films. Before watching them, I had no idea what they were about, but the rehabilitation of Norman Bates is a pretty unique approach to a series of stories, and you haven't seen that done in any other horror franchise or slasher franchise. Like, he is unequivocally the main character, the audience, the sympathetic audience surrogate for the sequels, despite the fact that he's unambiguously the villain of the first film. And I think that's interesting, whether these were planned in advance or not. And I'm not the only person who thinks that, because there's even a documentary that I would love to check out sometime called The Psycho Legacy, which is a documentary that specifically focuses on the sequels and not so much the first film. And I don't know, I think it's just it's a strange thing that, I knew there were sequels to Psycho, but I had no idea what they were about. They could have been like Monster of the Week happenings at Bates Motel, and I would have been like, that makes sense for Psycho sequels. But no, they are like integral story-based, carrying on the story sequels. And there's some stuff I really liked in Psycho 2, particularly Anthony Perkins, who's fantastic in Psycho, but he's still pretty good in Psycho 2, as well as Meg Tilly, who is, yes, the sister of Jennifer Tilly, who we'll be seeing a lot more of in weeks to come. She plays Mary Loomis, and I thought Mary and Norman's relationship was actually surprisingly touching, and probably the best aspect of any of the sequels. There's a scene where she's comforting him because he thinks he's going crazy again, thinks he's going psycho again, and she just hugs him, and it's a very genuinely sweet scene. I think making Lila Loomis the villainous force is a tragic but good idea as well. And while I love the ending where Norman poisons his new mother and then clubs her with a shovel, retconning it so that Mrs. Bates wasn't his real mother is like an insanely bad idea. And like,
that felt like the real
the sequel-y moment.
Yeah.
It feels like an early example of like a plot stretching retcon, the kind of thing we now know is like, that's bad writing. And I wonder if in 1983 it had been done so infrequently that people didn't realize it was bad writing, or the writers didn't realize it was bad writing. So yeah, there's a lot of good, and there's more good than bad, I think, which is probably what a 61% audience score, critic score reflects.
Yeah, barely.
But the last act drags and drags and drags. Norman becomes very hard to use on the chessboard of the story toward the end of the final act, and so he's just sort of going around believing his mother's back, while like other characters are actually doing like important things. And I think you could probably cut out a lot of that final act. But yeah, no, I was quite surprised by how genuinely quite good a lot of this was. It's more violent than the first one. It feels like it's embracing a lot more like slasher tropes.
Yeah, it's kind of like the first example of those like slasher tropes we've all come to know and love, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's like someone
the bigger and more kills.
Yeah. Someone like falls on a knife and it like goes up through their chin and like you can see it poking out of their mouth and shit like that. It's hot. Before reading the screenplay, Anthony Perkins turned down reprising the role of Norman Bates, and Norman Bates was nearly recast as Christopher Walken. Now let's say some famous Norman Bates quotes in a Christopher Walken voice. What have you got for me? This is an integral part of the podcast. Why don't you want to try? You're good at Christopher Walken.
A boy's best friend is his mother.
That's great. That's actually perfect. That's exactly what I want. All right, let me try one. Not inordinately. What do you say?
They'll look and be like, oh my, she wouldn't even hurt a fly.
Oh God, mother, blood.
It's Christopher Walken as Dracula, as Norman Bates.
Right, yeah. We all go a little mad sometimes.
For blood.
For blood. John Gavin, you remember him? He was unable to reprise his role as Samuel Loomis, the boyfriend from the first film, because he was appointed U.S. Ambassador of Mexico by President Ronald Reagan. So he could not return, so they killed him off.
Well, that's my Reagan.
Janet Leigh's daughter, Jamie Lee Curtis, was considered for Mary Loomis before the role went to Meg Tilly, who reportedly had a terrible time shooting this film. She did not get along with the director. She did not get along with Anthony Perkins. Everyone hated each other, which is surprising because their chemistry is probably the high point of the film.
Can you do a Reagan impression?
I'm going to forever change American cultural norms for the worst.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Vincent Canby of the New York Times wrote that the film has all of the characteristics of a conventional sequel to Hitchcock's 1960 classic, but as you watch it, you may feel as if you're seeing a couple of precocious film students play with artifacts found in the Hitchcock mausoleum. What do you think about that?
I like the word mausoleum.
Yeah. I guess it's like, it is funny to think like, it's one of those cases of like, these people who probably grew up inspired by Hitchcock are now given the rights to make a canonical continuation. And it's like, you know, that's always going to feel like, what gives you the right? Like, why do you get to do
How
this?
dare you stand where he
How dare
stood,
you stand where he once stood?
Mr. Gorbachev.
Gary Arnold from the Washington Post also asked, has movie storytelling broken down this grotesquely in 23 years? But this was Reagan time, so I wonder if there was a lot more like... There was a lot more like, we hate violence, we hate sexuality, like, you know.
It seems today that always is.
That's what they were thinking after seeing Psycho 2. And I wonder, what we could see from comparing the reviews for one of the first big legacy sequels to what we hear today. You know,
because I wonder what Ronald Reagan would sound like.
What would he say about it, Richard?
Well, a boy's best friend.
Let's give this 61% on Rotten Tomatoes.
I didn't know that I could do Reagan so well. I think that's just...
I think any president, I'm just going to make Nixon if I don't know specifically how they talk beforehand.
What would Richard Nixon sound like as Norman Bates?
A boy's best friend is his mother.
What would Donald Trump sound like?
I'll tell you what, and it's the truth. A boy's best friend. A boy's best friend is my win. I only went into Schwarzenegger because you did it back to me, and I've lost the. I lost the bite.
I've lost Donald Trump. I say this every day. A boy's best friend.
This is.
I haven't told the story.
You sound like a Hanna-Barbera character. You don't sound anymore like Donald Trump that I do.
I haven't told the story on the podcast, I don't think. But we were living together, and we were living with David Correos, the comedian, the internationally known comedian. I had gone to bed early. I think I might have been on an early shift the next day. But David came home later one night, and he was having a friend stay with us. And it was this guy whose whole act was like, he does stand-up as Donald Trump. He's a Donald Trump impersonator. And I just remember being kept awake by hearing on the other side of the wall you going, oh, duh, duh, duh. And they'd be like, oh my god, it's like he's here. It's so good. That is crazy.
Wow.
And then the next morning, because I couldn't hear his impression through the wall, I could just hear your like mind-blowing thing. And then the next day I was like, I was like, oh, what was that Trump guy like? And he were like, oh, his Trump wasn't very good. And I was like, oh, but it sounded like you were really enjoying it. And you were like, yeah, I just felt so awkward. Because he was just doing a Donald Trump impression in our living room.
One of the most like garden variety impressions you could do at the time. So it's like, oh yeah, cool. Yeah, no, that's funny. Back to Psycho 2, Richard, if I may. What, like, because I guess this interests me because with something like a new Star Wars or the new Ghostbusters, I think is a good example of this. Like, the criticisms are like, this is literally rehashing the plot of the first film. Like Ghostbusters Afterlife especially is like just, it uses the exact same mythology, and you know, Force Awakens and things like that. It became like this very specific kind of distant sequel.
That's what the new Scream is about.
Precisely. And I just think it's so interesting that you have here something that's like not as good as, but probably more closely akin to like Blade Runner 2049, which is like, no, we are taking where the story left off and we're continuing it.
Later is important.
Yeah, exactly. And I wonder if this had come out now or whatever, that it would have a bit of a different response, maybe.
Well, it'd probably be too long.
That's true. When asked of his thoughts in 2015, the screenwriter for this film, Tom Holland, no, not that Tom Holland, he replied, "We should have called it something other than Psycho." Presumably, he's the one that did it. Because it had no more than a passing resemblance to the original. What we did to Norman Bates and Lila Loomis was criminal. And he also added, outside of that, it was wonderful. So it's interesting to hear that even the writer doesn't really like what they did. That Tom Holland, by the way, went on after writing Psycho 2 to write and direct the original Fright Night film, as well as Child's Play. Bum, bum,
Hot
bum.
fucking damn.
Yeah. There are two big swinging Tom Holland dicks in Hollywood. One of them is significantly bigger than the other. And it's not this guy. Spider-Man Tom Holland's dick is bigger than... That's what I'm saying.
Wow.
Got some dumb IMDb trivia for Psycho 2. In the original Psycho, Marion Crane signs into the guest ledger at the Bates Motel as Mary Samuels. That's the same name that Mary Loomis adopts in this movie. There is a kind of suspension of disbelief that Norman should have remembered that. Nobody dresses up in drag in Psycho 2. Mary and Lila aren't dressing up in drag because they're women. They're just aging up. There are two characters with the last name Loomis, Lila Loomis and Mary Loomis. There's actually three, if you get, so someone's added to this. There's actually three if you count Billy Loomis, who is a character from Scream. This is AJ talking now. And I'm pretty sure there isn't a Billy Loomis in this film. The character of Sam Loomis from the original film was written out as the actor John Gavin was serving as the American ambassador to Mexico. Loomis was actually the last name of the Doctor in the later in Halloween 1978 and its sequels, played by Donald Pleasance. Many movie posters for Halloween featured a repeated knife-stabbing visual evoking the famous shower scene from the original Psycho. So we've got here a piece of uninteresting trivia that is then corrected by someone who says something wrong, and then it pivots to the Sam Loomis Halloween connection, which then pivots to an entirely unrelated piece of trivia about the movie posters that is just...
I like how it's like if you're looking for a connection between Halloween and Psycho, instead of being like, if the main character is Marion Crane's daughter, you're like, oh, they both have stabbing.
There are 4 killers in the story. That's more than any other slasher movie in the history of film! ! We see flashbacks of Norman killing Norma. Yeah, right. We see flashbacks of Norman killing Norma, and then we see Norman kill Emma Spool, who's his quote-unquote real mother. Then Emma Spool kills 3 people. She kills Toomey the teenager, Tim in the basement, and Lila. Then Mary kills Dr. Raymond. Then Sheriff Hunt shoots Mary. That's 4 killers. In fact, there's only 7 lead characters in this movie, and most of them are killers. Only 3 of them are not killers. The main cast includes Emma Spool, Warren Toomey, Norman Bates, John Hunt, Dr. Raymond, Lila Loomis, and Mary Loomis. So Raymond, Lila, and Toomey are the only ones who aren't killers.
Wow.
And
Those
final...
are a lot of words for...
Well, you think that's a lot of words. I've got a lot of words. I've got another piece of dumb IMDb trivia for you here. You just tell me where you want me to stop, okay?
Okay.
All right,
the type of knife used.
No, it's not that, but I was expecting that. We hear Warren Toomey scream at Norman in several scenes and call him a psycho. This is ironic because this franchise essentially coined the term psycho, or helped popularize it. People often ask if the movie Psycho made up the term psycho, a term which we all use today. The answer is yes and no. Robert Bloch and Alfred Hitchcock did not invent the word psycho, but they made it infinitely more popular. Interestingly, although the colloquialism psycho does in fact predate the movie, it was rare. The term was coined in the 30s and 40s and probably by the medical community who usually used it as a shorthand, just a shortening of psychological. Sometimes people would use it as a put down, but not often. One area it does pop up in this era is the Wonder Woman comics. One of her big villains was introduced in 1943 was Dr. Psycho. Again, the term was coming from Wonder Woman creator William Moulton Marston, who was in the medical community when he was a doctor, and Marston even used it in the way that we use it today as a put down, but again, that was rare. Probably following in William Moulton Marston's lead, or copying him the next year in 1944, was DC Comics debuted another supervillain called Psycho Pirate. Then in the 50s, the term popped up twice, and the popular syndicated Broderick Crawford police... That is not even halfway through this insanely long piece of IMDb trivia.
The answer is just no, then.
At the end, the last sentence says, so Bloch didn't invent the word psycho. Maybe William Moulton Marston did, but Bloch definitely did popularize it. It's like a little fucking essay. It actually is. It's like an essay with no paragraph breaks.
Yeah.
Well, Richard, let us move swiftly forward 3 years, 1986 to Psycho 3.
What?
You thought he was 2 Psycho and Psycho, well now he's 3 Psycho and Psycho 3. 3 Psycho because this was directed by the Psycho himself, Anthony Perkins. The man playing Norman Bates directed Psycho 3. It was his first of only 2 directing gigs, the other being a 1988 black comedy.
Chucky 3?
No, a 1988 black comedy called Lucky Stiff, which follows a guy who winds up at a cannibal Christmas dinner held by descendants of the Donner Party, which is interesting because Anthony Perkins taking on the Norman Bates role was like, wow, this romantic lead, because that's what he was known for, playing like a psychopath. But then, like, I guess if he was drawn to the subject matter so much that he made another slasher or another horror comedy afterwards, it's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
41%.
It has 59%, so 4 less than Psycho 2, but crucially dipping below Fresh, which, again, Rotten Tomatoes gets this franchise, I think. I think it knows what it's talking about. Before we discuss it, I do want to just give a little content warning because suicide is quite a massive part of the story and we will be discussing it. So if that is something that upsets you, please skip ahead. But Richard, what is this film about?
So in this one, there's this suicidal nun who just keeps trying to kill herself. And then there's also a hot young dude, and then they kind of their lives intertwine at Norman Bates's motel. Yeah, this one. Yeah, this one when I logged on to do this, I was like, what is Psycho 3 about? And had to be like, oh yes, it's the one with the young dude who comes to work for Norman and loves to fuck.
Yeah. Played by Jeff Fahey, who would go on to play Lapidus in Lost, among many other characters. But I've never seen him so sexy. My God. So Norman, the nun that comes to stay with them, her name is Maureen. And Norman, when he sees her enter the motel, he's freaking out. He's like, mother's going to take over. I'm going to murder again. And he goes, it recreates the lead up to the shower scene from the first film. But when he pulls back the curtain, Maureen has slit her wrists in the bathtub, and he actually saves her and nurses her back to health, and the two have sort of a will they, won't they romance. But again, at the end of this film, almost everyone is dead, and Norman, having actually murdered some innocent people in this one, is sent back to the institution. Again, I thought this was pretty interesting and had quite a few good ideas. It's worse than Psycho 2, but I still gave it the same score. And I think, as I said, 59% when 2 got 61 feels pretty true for me. And I think the nun stuff, it begins with, like, you hear like a church bell ringing, and then you hear this nun yell, "There is no God!" And it is quite captivating because it's like, where am I
What's
in the
going
Psycho?
on here?
Yeah, exactly. And that subversion of the original shower scene where he saves her, he goes to kill Maureen only to find she's trying to kill herself. I think that is a great idea. I think that's a great idea that only works in a sequel to Psycho. And I really, really liked that. And I was like, damn, am I going to really like Psycho 3? But don't worry, everybody. It's not that good. And it's pretty funny that both first 2 sequels are just about Norman trying to get laid by woman half his age as well.
Yeah. I want to also point out the thing that stuck out the most to me in this film, and because also, like, it's one of those things where it's like, well, duh, but, like, Anthony Perkins is so fucking good in the first movie. Like, phenomenally good. He's so fucking bad in Psycho 3. Like, phenomenally. So? Inordinately
bad. Wow. I mean,
in
is it
Psycho
because
3.
He's directing it? It was his first directing
It must be,
gig?
but he's just, like, so, like, to use an acting term, he's, like, mugging in every scene he's in. It's just
what does
like,
that mean?
Anthony, this is the scene where you're supposed to act surprised. So he's just like, wow, you know, like, he looks like an emoji.
Right,
rather than actually feeling it's such a bad performance.
It is, and it's worse than Psycho 2 as well, which I thought was actually quite good. But I do agree
that's fine, but
that it's weaker in this one.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's weird.
They undo the retcon, which is in itself another retcon, where they explain that the original Mrs. Bates is Norman's mother, and the other lady who was Mrs. Bates' sister, so Norman's auntie, was actually just crazy, and it was this whole love triangle of jealousy, and no one knew who Norman belonged to. I'm glad that it set the canon straight that Mrs. Bates is Norman's mother, but it's still stupid that we had to keep returning to this silly little plot that they put in.
Silly little plot.
I do think one thing that this film does that I'd even say is better than what is in the original is
what the fuck?
You see
It's Norman's performance.
You see Norman speaking as mother in this. There's a point where he's dressed up as mother and he speaks, and they've obviously dubbed over whatever the woman's voice who voices Norma Bates in his imagination, which is something that I think the original did need to show, because other people hear this shrill old lady's voice, and we're just expected to believe in every other movie when other people hear this that, like, yeah, I guess that's just Norman doing an old lady voice, and he's just got a really dynamic high range.
Yeah. Could have been a voice actor in another life.
And it's like, I can believe that, but it would be helpful if you showed me him talking like that. Because it's hard to believe when you don't, or don't show other people hearing her, because that's what happens in the original. In issue 57 of Fangoria magazine, screenwriter Charles Edward Pogue revealed the plot of the original script and said that in this version it was Dwayne Duke, who is Jeff Fahey's character. He was the killer and had intentionally come to the Bates Motel because he was obsessed with Norman. Maureen, the nun, was a neurotic psychologist who'd come to the motel to replace Dr. Raymond from the previous film, and Pogue had intended to cast Janet Leigh as Maureen. So like a doppelganger of Marion
It's very
Crane.
Vertigo.
Yeah. Universal rejected these ideas, arguing that Bates had to be the killer and that Leigh was wrong for the film. However, Maureen's actions remained virtually unchanged. Her character was merely changed to a young nun. I kind of like a lot of these ideas, probably more than the movie we got. I think part of me is a bit bummed that Norman goes psycho again, and I think the successful rehabilitation of a man is a maybe more interesting story, and if Duke had been the killer who's like inspired by him, that's a pretty good idea, like a nugget of an idea to do a psycho movie around. What do you think?
Yeah, the Janet Leigh thing is crazy. That's interesting. But yeah, I think that, like you say, the Jeff Fahey thing, I think that's probably where I thought the film was going. There's
even a bit where he confronts Jeff Fahey and he's like, and the language of the filmmaking made me think, oh, this'll be where he reveals that he's actually the killer. But then he's like, I know you're the killer and I'm going to extort you. And then he fights him and ends up killing, Norman ends up killing him. But no, I agree. I think that would be a more interesting place to take it.
Yeah. One thing I want to just bring up about Psycho 3,
and
this is going to be really fun for our listeners. The poster for this film fucking sucks. I hate it so much. Every time I saw Anthony Perkins staring at me, offering me a key with this weird fucking look on his face. It's such an ugly fucking poster, and it shows how far we've fallen from Psycho, telling us that we won't be admitted into the cinema after a certain time. He just looks so stupid. Can you describe the look on his face?
It's sort of, it's like, what it is that I think what makes Norman Bates a compelling character is he doesn't want to be psycho. This is Anthony Perkins wanting to appear psycho.
Yeah.
And it undermines the character.
Like, he's so good in the first film. Like, when they first meet each other and he's like checking her in, he's the perfect combination of like awkward and charming and shy, and it's such a good performance. And then here he's got this weird fucking, oh, I might be a psycho kind of look about him. Here's a key to Bates Motel.
Mm.
And it's like, Anthony, baby, you've misread what worked about your character.
Mm. I mean,
And
I think,
it sucks that an actor like Anthony Perkins would be wasted on a director like Anthony Perkins.
in his defense, he really did. I don't think he wanted to direct it. I think I was reading.
I can bloody tell.
He asked someone. I can't remember who, but he asked someone else to co-direct it with him, and they were like, "Nah, dog, it's all you." And yeah, I don't know if he did as good of a job as an actor. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a poorly directed film. I think he was quite thorough in a lot of his scene blocking, and there was a lot of people reportedly were quite surprised at how competent of a director he was, I think. But
wow. That's how incompetent of an actor he became.
Yeah, exactly. I couldn't find any dumb IMDb trivia or anything really for this, so we can quickly move on.
Well, we had a dumb poster for the film. That's enough.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a dumb whole movie in 1987's Bates Motel, directed by Richard Rothstein. This doesn't have a critic score on Rotten Tomatoes. This is not part of the same canon as the three we've just talked about, and 4, which came out after this. But what is Bates Motel about?
Bates Motel is it ignores Psycho 2 and 3.
It technically ignores Psycho in a lot of ways. It feels more like it's a sequel to the novel than a sequel to the original movie.
It's very clearly, it feels like it's set up to be a TV pilot.
Yeah.
Which it was. But yeah, it's a different guy, and Jason Bateman's in it.
So, Jason Bateman. I think you meant Norman Bates. But Jason Bateman literally is in it. Yeah, so it's about a guy named Alex West, played by Bud someone. Bud Court. Bud Court. Weird looking dude, Bud Court.
When you... So when we have a disagreement, and we have to go to Bud Court.
So when Alex West was 8 years old, he murdered his abusive stepfather and was sent to some sort of institution where he was taken under the wing of Norman Bates after the first film. And after Norman's death, he bequeaths Bates Motel to Alex. And if you guys haven't seen this movie, I think this is one of the stupidest movies I've ever seen. Because, and not in a fun way either. It's like a movie that just doesn't understand the elements it's playing with, because so little of it is a horror. It's essentially, we bought a zoo, but with a motel instead of a zoo. Right? So he gets them, he inherits the motel, and he goes to the bank to get a loan to build it up, and none of this is spooky or scary. He just convinces a banker, yep, you can have the money. He runs into this woman who decides to help him. Her name is Willie, and they have sort of a very close friendship. The fact that a lot of the plot outlines for this movie are a mentally disturbed man inherits a motel, or after Norman Bates' death, a disturbed young man. He's not he's a normal guy. Whatever disturbing past he has is not played by Bud Court in the portrayal of the character. He doesn't have voices. He's just a guy. And so yeah, it's just him renovating a fucking motel for most of it. There are horror elements, he starts seeing Mrs. Bates around. They dig up her bones and stuff, they dig up skeletons and stuff. So it's not like the horror isn't there, but it's divorced from the other sections of the movie. There's not this tone of suspense that is maintained throughout the movie. And so this whole thing is them a big stakes moment is we've got to make $10,000 by tomorrow, or the bank is going to claim.
And then there's a talent quest for exactly $10,000.
I mean, it is not too far away from that.
Yeah.
So in the final, and I'm not kidding, it's like the final 30 minutes of the movie. A woman turns up to Bates Motel and he's like, "Oh, you're our first." Norman Alex is like, "You're our first customer ever." She buys her. She says she's a writer, and he's like, "Oh, great." She's like, "I just want some peace and quiet." They give her a room. She goes to a room, and then a whole party turns up of like college kids. And meanwhile, in this lady's bedroom, and a content warning for suicide as well, it turns out she's actually depressed and she's going to kill herself. But before she can, one of these students from this college campus, this is when the last 30 minutes of the movie, turns up and is like, "Hey, come party with us." And she's like, No, I'm old. I'm like 37 years old and I've been married 3 times. And the teenager's like, "No, just come party with us." And so she goes into the foyer and there's a big disco going on. And then she's like, this teenage girl's like, "Meet my friend." And she introduces her to a fresh-faced Jason Bateman, who they dance together for about a minute, and then he tries to kiss her, and she wants it, but then is like, no, I'm too old, which in real life is the correct decision to make when you're in your 30s and a 17-year-old tries to kiss you. But in the film, this is presented as like she's standing in her own way kind of like vibe, right? Jason Bateman then leaves the disco and goes and slumps outside where he's all upset, and she goes and talks to him where she's like, "You've got your whole life ahead of you, like you don't need to be talking to an old lady like me." And then they hug and he says, "Thank you for everything." And I was like, "For everything? You danced for a minute and nearly kissed each other." Like
he probably got a big stiffy doing it, though.
But it's the
we needed to see the stiffy.
We needed to see the stiffy, and the movie needed to be called Psycho Stiffy.
Stiffy Motel.
It's like the dialogue is that of like a whole movie that we've just seen where these two people have gone on this like big emotional journey, but they haven't gone on a big emotional journey. Anyway, she says goodbye to him. She goes back to her room. Again, this is in the last 30 minutes of a movie that has not been about her at all. And then when she gets back to her motel, she picks up the knife or whatever, the razor blade or whatever she was going to use. And then the girl is back and she's like, "So we couldn't talk you out of it, huh?" And she's like, "What do you mean?" And she goes outside and all of the college students are like sitting there in their cars, like watching her. And they each go round and talk about how, surprise, they actually have all committed suicide. And these are actually ghosts. And they were there to convince her not to do it, including Jason Bateman. And so then she decides, okay, I won't kill myself. And then the next morning she wakes up and Alex is there and she's like, "Hey," and he's like, "Hey, did you have a good night?" She's like, "Yeah, it was great." And then she leaves. And then I wrote this down. Alex watches her leave and then looks to the screen and says, "If you ever need a room, come on by. I can't say for sure what you'll find, but that is what makes the world go round." Which is like, that's what makes the world go round. Like, there is a nugget of like a good end line in there. It's weird that he's talking to the camera, but like to end it with,
just say, "If you ever need a room, come on by."
Yeah, that's what makes the world go round. It is. This is so weird and so strange, but not at all in a fun way. It's like, just like, it's dumb. It's a stupid movie.
Yeah.
And in case, yep.
Forgot I watched it.
This is easily the worst Psycho movie, I think.
I think you'd be hard pressed finding someone who disagrees with you on that.
Well, no, someone commented on my Letterboxd review and was like, "I thought this was fun." So
well,
I don't know.
That person is dumb.
In case it wasn't obvious already, Bates Motel was indeed intended to be a feature-length pilot to a TV show, which presumably explains an entire story arc, which is introduced and resolved within the final 30 minutes of the film. And Alex's piece to camera at the end. I would imagine each episode of the show would have been like Alex running the motel and then a Monster of the Week B story happening, like a Twilight Zone situation.
Foster's home for people who've killed themselves.
But not, it would be like a different phenomenon each episode, and it's more that Bates Motel is a nexus point for strange goings on.
It's a an Alex West has to ferry souls to the afterlife.
Yeah, something like that, which is,
Not a bad idea for a show.
but it's also not Psycho. It's not.
Yeah.
That's not what
It's not a
Psycho's
psycho
about.
idea.
We only
It's actually
accept
fairly level-headed.
psycho fucking ideas. Yeah, so it was not picked up for a series. Anthony Perkins apparently called this film just terrible.
I thought he could. I thought he had ruined his reputation after Psycho 3, but he's got me back.
What did you think of Jason Bateman, little baby Bateman?
I was like, the whole time I was like, "Fuck, that looks like Jason Bateman," and then his name was in the credits. I was like, that's why.
And you'll be happy to know, Richard, that Now Playing Podcast reviewed Bates Motel.
Really?
Yeah.
This seems way out of the.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? The film received 3 not recommends.
Wow.
This is weird, and I kind of resent having to watch it because it muddies the water of the franchise. It's a weird movie, and I don't even. It's not the weird kind of thing that you should check out. Everybody, it's on YouTube. It's the easiest one to watch.
Oh, really? I didn't
but,
know that.
Yeah, it's on YouTube, but it's bad. It's so weird.
Yeah.
It has a 36% audience score, but that doesn't really mean anything. Yeah.
Sure, who cares?
So swiftly moving on to Psycho 4: The Beginning, which was released in 1990. This was directed by Mick Garris, who is a name we've heard on the podcast before. Richard, what else did Mick Garris direct?
That's my answer.
He directed Critters 2, The Main Course, which I swear, I was like, how many times have I revealed that a director directed Critters 2, The Main Course? But this is the first one. So it must be just Critters that we've covered the director for multiple times. He also directed the other The Shining, the one that the less famous Shining adaptation. Yeah, this doesn't have a critic score on Rotten Tomatoes because it was a made-for-TV film, but it does have a 33 audience percent score, which is lower than Bates Motel. What is Psycho 4: The Beginning about?
So this is like a real, Godfather 2 situation, where it's part prequel, part sequel. So there's a radio talk show going on about people who commit matricide, killing their mums. And Norman Bates calls up and is like, "I'm Norman Bates and I love to kill mums." And they're like, "Keep him on the line, get him talking about his life." And then
you see the murders that were alluded to in the original film.
And he's like, "Yeah, all that happened is this girl wanted to have sex with me."
Yeah. It is also revealed that modern day Norman is married, and his wife is pregnant, which she got that way by lying to Norman, who told her he didn't want kids. And so the whole movie is like him planning to murder his wife because he believes that their child will inherit the psycho. But in the end, he nearly.
This movie should be called "Don't Catch the Psycho."
Yeah. He makes her meet at the old Mrs. Bates mansion, where he tries to murder her, but then she manages to talk him down and realize that he's all good now, and that he's and then he sets the mansion on fire and has to confront his demons. What did you think of this film?
Didn't like it.
No,
I think it doesn't make any sense.
Why
not? It's called Psycho 4: The Beginning, but he's actually Psycho for the whole film.
Very good.
Thank you very much.
This is the only. I thought this is so weird. This is the only sequel that reuses the. Like, isn't it weird that you'd have that, like, the big piece of iconography from the original and you never use it again until the made-for-TV 4th entry?
Yeah.
Similar to 2 and 3, I didn't see this film as entirely without value. I think this is the only official entry which was made for TV, so there's definitely like a TV show structure to it. You said it was a Godfather 2.
It ads and stuff.
Yeah. You said it was a Godfather 2 situation. I actually would call it a Tomb Raider Chronicles situation, which is Tomb Raider Chronicles is like everyone thinks Lara Croft is dead, so they all sit around in a room and swap stories about her, and you play the stories that people are swapping. So this is he's on the radio and he talks about either the first person I killed, etc. This was written by Joseph Stefano, most well known for writing the screenplay for Psycho, as the original guy came back to write this one.
That feels like it's a like I feel like that's happened more than once, right?
And for like Fortnights.
Yeah, or just in film where it's like I feel this has definitely happened before where one of the main creative voices has returned for
Rocky.
Like, yeah, it is Rocky.
Director of Rocky, directed
terrible.
the worst Rocky.
Yeah.
I liked that this film wasn't afraid to confront the incestuous implications of Norma and his mum, which have always hovered over the story. His mum is like it's the first time we've ever seen her like as a living person in this film in the flashbacks, and it's creepy. It's too creepy for TV, and that was kind of cool. They like roll around on the floor together, and she just discovers he's got a boner and scolds him and all this sort of thing. And I was like, there, man, like, go dark with it. Like, you've got to go dark with it. And I thought the ending was cool. I thought the mansion being set on fire was some nice symbolism. I thought it was weird that the radio storyline, the like framing device, sort of just disappears for the final act. CCH Pounder plays the radio host, and she's just left being like, is he gonna kill his wife? And then we don't go back to her. I thought it was a bit confusing that the flashbacks don't play in order, and there's like a kid who's playing young Norman. It's actually Henry Thomas, who you might recognize as Elliot from E.T. is young Norman.
Oh, really? Right, okay, yeah.
And so like it goes to like, this is the first woman that mother made me kill. This is the second woman that mother made me kill. Then it's like, then back before I killed anyone, I had this experience with mother. And then it's like, and this is when I killed mother. And it's like, this feels like, I don't know, like it's just a bit like messy, I guess, in that area. But yeah. According to IMDb, Anthony Perkins and Psycho 3 screenwriter Charles Edward Pogue originally pitched an idea for Psycho 4 that had Norman's house and motel getting turned into a tourist attraction for horror weekends. Norman then escapes from a mental institution with a mute patient, and the actor who was set to play Norman Bates for the horror weekend quits, and Norman comes home and gets hired to play himself. Pogue claims that it was meant to be a black comedy, but Universal opposed the idea. This sounds like a
Jaws 3 Human Zero.
Yeah. Or Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, like the satirical. We can't match the prestige of the original, so let's make it a comedy.
Make fun of it. Yeah.
I like that idea. I probably like that idea more than any of the other sequels.
Yeah. I feel like it wouldn't have been pulled off though.
Yeah. No. Totally. You're totally right. I think this is the worst of the official sequels, though it is cocky enough that it ignores 2 and 3. It's widely believed to be a direct sequel to Psycho. Stefano did not like the sequels, and so because Norman in this film is a free man, but it could just as easily be set 30 years after he was originally imprisoned, as opposed to the 4 years since he was put back in prison in Psycho 3.
Yeah.
So yeah. I want to talk about Anthony Perkins, Richard, and I've got a sad story, content warning for some abuse, among other things here. But Anthony Perkins, while filming Psycho 4...
Am I going to feel bad for saying he's bad in the third one?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think you're going to regret it, because it sounds like he was a great dude, like a progressive, like, feminist in the 60s, that's, like, not the kind of, like... Not the popular opinion for Reagan-esque times, I guess. But he was diagnosed with HIV while shooting Psycho 4 and actually died in 1992, so 2 years after Psycho 4, of AIDS-related pneumonia. He was 60. Perkins' Wikipedia page is very long, but it sounds like the guy had a pretty tragic life. So he was secretly maybe secretly gay, and reportedly only engaged in same-sex relationships until his 30s, most notably with actor Tab Hunter, artist Christopher Marcos, and dance choreographer Grover Dale, who was a lot of people, I think, consider to be the love of his life. Was Grover Dale. But he ended his 7-year relationship with Grover Dale in 1971, so before Psycho 2, and would soon undergo conversion therapy, which included electroshock therapy and pressure to sleep with women. From a psychiatrist. He married actress Barry Berenson in 1973, and the two stayed together until his death 19 years later. She herself would die only 9 years after this as a passenger on American Airlines Flight 11, the plane which was hijacked and crashed into the first World Trade Center tower on September 11th, 2001.
Oh, fuck.
That was like, do you know how I discovered that? I was I was on the Wikipedia page for Anthony Perkins, and I was just sort of like jotting down notes, and I hovered over Barry Berenson just to check if she was an actress, because I was like, what? I want to be a married actress, Barry Berenson. Hovered over it, and in the opening paragraph that it displayed was like, she died in 9/11, and I was like, what the fuck? So like, I had this paragraph here that goes from like, this tragic love story to conversion therapy to AIDS death to 9/11. That's crazy stuff.
Insane.
Perkins also, interestingly, had quite an abusive mother. He said he was sexually abused by her, and said she was constantly touching me and caressing me, not realizing what effect she was having. She would touch me all over, even stroking the inside of my thighs right up to my crotch, and also stated that he became jealous of his own father and said, it was an Oedipal thing in a pronounced form. I loved him, but I also wanted him to be dead so I could have her all to myself. Imagine playing Norman Bates and having felt those feelings for real in your life.
I can't imagine it.
That is crazy. I thought it was so interesting. It feels like there's a lot more to dig into with Anthony Perkins' life, but that's the broad strokes of it. I thought it was pretty interesting. His family were like, he was gay. Like they didn't like that people described him as bisexual. They said that it was all just a front for whatever reason that he had to want to not be gay. But yeah, pretty sad, and died in 1992 at only 60 years old. A lot of the original cast of Psycho are dead now. I believe the only person who's still alive, from the like heavy hitters of the original film, was the woman that played Lila Loomis. Or Lila Crane. She's the only one that's still alive today. Yeah. Well, now it's time to talk about the final film in the Psycho franchise. And this came out in 1998. It was called Psycho. It was directed by Gus Van Sant. What do you think this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
Or 32.
38. And what is it about?
It's never before has the statement been truer that it is just the first film over again. Yes,
this is a remake of the first film, but not only a remake, it is famously one of, I can't think of any other examples of basically a shot-for-shot remake, where the camera movements, the setups, the locations, the direction, the same script was used. It is designed to look identical to the first film. We'll go into some small differences soon. But what did you think of Psycho 1998?
It's fascinating. It is. I'm glad this film exists.
Yeah, totally.
One film like this has to exist at some point.
Yeah.
And people like it doesn't take away the original film, nothing. It's a fascinating experiment. And it's because Gus Van Sant is by no means a bad director, but
came off Good Will Hunting to do this film.
Yeah. And it's this really interesting sort of look into what a director actually does, and there's so much of this you can't put your finger on it-ness about what's not as good.
Yeah.
And it's Yeah, I mean, a lot of it is the performances aren't as good.
Yeah.
And a lot of the kind of dated filmmaking techniques don't play as well and with 1998 cameras and performances and like styles of performance and everything. But yeah, I'm sure you've written down stuff of this because I've heard varying sorts of things over the years about like why Gus actually made this.
Yeah. So once again, stating what I've said about every single Psycho film after the first film, this is at least interesting. It's probably my least favorite outside of Bates Motel of the whole franchise, but I also think it is the most interesting one.
One of the most interesting films ever made.
Yeah, totally. And hey, at least it shortens the movie-ruining psychiatrist monologue from the first film. The reason I took the first film down half a star is shortened, truncated in this version. I do have to say, my watch of this film was impaired, Richard, because unbeknownst to me, I was accidentally Chromecasting the film twice at the same time because of VLC's fucky Chromecasting capability. So I mostly didn't notice it, but when the striking theme music would play at random times, I would be like, "Why is the music playing now?" Like, she'd be like writing the note and it would start playing and I'd be like, what the fuck? And I'd hear
But then the film is kind of like that.
Yeah, exactly, which is equally as confusing. And also, occasionally I would hear a dialogue from another scene playing underneath the characters. But combined with like surreal imagery, which flashes on the screen during the murders, I just assumed this was a very strange but intentional creative decision that it's like...
Gus Van Sant.
Yeah, like when they're talking to the sheriff and they learn the truth about Norma Bates, it was playing Norma talking to Norman under it. And I was like, this is... Like, it didn't not fit. And so I was like, there's nothing wrong with it. And it wasn't until the final scene that I realized this was happening. And
that's so insane.
I watched the final scene in peace.
Holy shit.
The opening happened and the remixed version of the famous theme tune started playing and I was like, this sucks. It's all off beat and off rhythm, but it's probably because I was listening to it like 30 seconds apart from each other.
Oh my god.
So yeah, before watching this film, I was so curious about how a film could be so poorly received, and it was very poorly received, when it's faithful. It was such a faithful recreation of the original. And as it started, I was like, Anne Heche is pretty good as Marion Crane. It's a different performance, but it's not bad. It's all right. And then Vince Vaughn showed up, and he fucking sucks as Norman Bates.
Yeah.
I don't understand how Vince Vaughn was cast as Norman Bates. I think he is a massive reason why the film tanked critically. I think he's terrible in this. I can't imagine why they cast him. Why would you cast Vince Vaughn as Norman Bates? It's so weird.
I do want to play one of our favorite little games of finding out how old is Anthony Perkins in Psycho, and then finding... Okay, so he was born in 1932, so he would have been 28 in Psycho. So we're looking for an actor who was born in 1970, who would have been 28 in 1998.
Yep.
In 1970. So we're looking... Who could have played? Matt Damon.
I mean, Good Will Hunting had just happened. Yeah. I don't think it would be a bad cast.
Ethan Hawke.
Yep. Ethan Hawke would be great.
Yeah, if he hadn't died, River Phoenix would have been great.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Like, Vince Vaughn has a very specific pedigree, and especially in 1998, and it is not this kind of role. I just thought he sucked. I thought he was
Matthew
so bad.
McConaughey.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Matthew Lillard.
Yeah. I don't know if Matthew Lillard would...
Vince Vaughn.
Maybe.
Oh, no. So Vince Vaughn is 28 in the film.
So Vaughn feels like he's intentionally underemphasizing all the iconic lines from the original. So in the original, Anthony Perkins is like, oh, we all go a little mad sometimes, and that's like a sound beat, that's like a sound bite. That's an iconic piece of audio. Or a boy's best friend is his mother. Like, we're quoting these things because they stick out in the film. But he and it sort of is another acting term. He's throwing them away. Like, he's throwing these lines away.
Yeah, boy's best friend's his mother.
He's not doing the Vince Vaughn voice, but that is kind of what he's doing. And even though it's a good thing, it would be also bad if he emphasized them. But because he's underemphasizing them, it feels distinctly intentional. Feels like he's doing it on purpose. That he's like, we'll go a little mad sometimes. And it's like, no.
Sorry, Kawasaki.
According to IMDb, I do have some other actors here that were apparently considered. And I don't know if this is true. This is just on IMDb. We got Tobey Maguire, would have been great. Christian Bale would have been great. Robert Sean Leonard, who's House's best friend in House.
Oh yeah. Also in Depot Society with Ethan Hawke.
Yep. Henry Thomas, who played Elliot in E.T. Joaquin Phoenix, who I think would have been good. But I reckon the best person in running, and probably the least famous out of all of these, Jeremy Davies was apparently considered.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
For Norman Bates. He would have fucking killed it as Norman Bates. He would have been so good.
For those who don't know who Jeremy Davies is
Faraday on Lost.
Faraday on Lost. He's also the private who's too scared to go upstairs in Saving Private Ryan.
Mm-hmm.
He was the dad of the Black Phone recently.
Right, there you go. Yeah, he's in a lot of TV. Done a lot of TV work. He would have been so good as Norman Bates. It would have been
that awkward, charming. Sinister.
Yeah. It'd almost be like a career-making performance if he'd got the role.
He could have been in The Internship with Wilson.
could have had it all. Also, according to IMDb, at the time of the film's release, it was felt by some critics that Vince Vaughn and Viggo Mortensen, who plays Sam Loomis in the film, should have switched roles.
Absolutely,
that Mortensen could play a creepy role and Vaughn can easily play, quote, a normal guy. That feels obvious as well. I could totally Viggo Mortensen's a lot older, but that's fine. Like, I don't care how old Norman Bates is, I think he would have been a great Norman Bates. Casey Silver, the then head of production at Universal Pictures, felt that a shot-for-shot remake of Psycho was, quote, a very strange idea. The idea of remaking a classic like Psycho just seems like a dangerous business to get into. And when asked why he wanted to remake the film in this manner, Van Sant responded, why not? It's a marketing scheme. Why does a studio ever remake a film? Because they have this little thing they've forgotten about that they could put in the marketplace and make money from. Which is an intensely cynical answer to that question. But yeah, apparently he began.
Well, it's one of these. Yeah, you're taking your complaints of Hollywood and taking it to the extreme and being like, yeah, why not just do this? And yeah, like I've heard quotes from Gus Van Sant where he's like, "Why did you remake Psycho?" He says, "So no one else would."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He began with the vision of remaking the film entirely shot for shot, stating that he and the crew started out being fanatical about doing it exactly the same, but early into filming realized that it wasn't going to work out. He said that there were a couple of scenes where we just couldn't get it right. We couldn't see how Hitchcock did the blocking, where people were supposed to be standing in relation to the camera, so all we could do was loosely base them on the original, which it's fine. I think it plays still. There are a few notable differences between this and the original that I noted down. As mentioned, like surreal imagery flashes on screen, like subliminal like stuff during the murder scenes, which I don't really understand, but it is there. I also noticed that the various prices for things like Marion's new car, the cost of the motel room, and even the money Marion steals were all adjusted for inflation. So it was 40 grand in the original, now it's 400 grand. Vince Vaughn jerks off when spying on Marion in her motel room, which was not in the original at all.
It's interesting because I've read that that's like a confirming something that was long rumored to be in the original,
Right. And finally, Lila Crane mentions grabbing her Walkman before they head out at one point.
Nice.
Because that's her character thing. She has a Walkman that she listens to. Played by Julianne Moore. The cast of outside of Vince Vaughn, you've got Anne Hesh as Marion Crane, Julianne Moore as Lila Crane, Viggo Mortensen as Sam Loomis, and William H. Macy as Abergast, the detective.
And also Robert Forster.
Yeah, who does he play? He was like just a detective at the end.
He's the monologuing detective at the end.
Right, there you go. Or the psychiatrist, yeah.
Yeah. So, let's talk about Anne Hesh. Because if you'd asked me... So, up until watching this film, and still kind of... I only know two things about Anne Hesh. One is that you can see her butthole in Psycho. And two, that she died like 2 months ago in a car accident.
Did she?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, she got into a very serious car accident.
Oh my god, yes.
And then was taken off life support after being...
That's right. Oh, no, I was reading about that. That's why I recognized the name. Oh my god, that's sad. That's so sad.
But yeah, it was this weird thing where, like, for some reason, I think there's a song called Anne Hesh's Butthole.
There's a tweet by Seth Rogen.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Seth Rogen, first of all, when people say you can see her butthole, it's after she's been stabbed, and this is so I love on the show how we take every talking subject as seriously as the last. like we're just talking about like the tragic life of Anthony Perkins and like a 9/11 connection, and they're like, the thing with the butthole is after she gets killed in the shower, she like tumbles out of the bath and is sort of in like a prone position against the rim of the bath. So it's not like it's like a close-up of her butthole. It's like
it's
from
not
above.
like the iconic spinning shot instead of her eye, it's her butthole.
No, it's a bird's eye view of her falling out of the bath and like
in Downward Dog.
I'm gonna say it. You can't really see her. You can't really see her butthole. It's if you can, it's like a couple of pixels.
Yeah.
But in researching this to see if Seth Rogen's claim in 2014 that the only butthole ever seen in mainstream film was Anne Hesh in Psycho, and researching to see if that was still true, I stumbled across Goatsy for the first time by accident. I saw, or I don't think it was, I think it was a similar picture to Goatsy, and that ruined my day. And that's all I have to say about the shower scene in the Psycho remake.
But yeah, it was just this weird thing that I don't know how I like learnt this, because I actually hadn't seen the Seth Rogen tweet until today when I was trying to work out how I knew this, and and to confirm that for some reason somewhere in my mind I was like, is there a song called Anne Hesh's Butthole? that I was like, the only things I know about the Psycho remake. And so when it was like, Anne Hesh died, it was like, oh, the woman whose butthole you can see in the Psycho remake. That was all that was literally the only thing I knew about her. Anyway, rest in peace.
Rest in peace. So there are a few other things I want to talk about before we head into the segments. Roger Ebert gave this 1.5 stars, and he said of the masturbation, Norman jerking off while spying on Marion, he said that this change was appropriate because this new Psycho evokes the real thing in an attempt to recreate remembered passion, which is something only Roger Ebert could write. He also went on to say the rest of the film is an invaluable experiment in the theory of cinema because it demonstrates that a shot-by-shot remake is pointless. Genius apparently resides between or beneath the shots, or in chemistry that cannot be timed or counted, which is a great point. Modern reevaluations of the remake aren't exactly more positive, with Gus Van Sant himself saying that it proved that no one can really copy a film exactly the same way as the original. It is widely seen more now as a worthy experiment than anything else. An LA Weekly retrospective concluded that experiments don't always have to work to be worth doing. Which I think I agree with. But bringing it into modern film discourse, according to IMDb, director Ty West, who's doing the X-Pearl movies, He has been one of the few defenders of Psycho 1998. He argues that Van Sant, as a director, by remaking Psycho completely shot for shot, was experimenting and creating a commentary on the quality of the film. By taking a beloved classic that has been worshipped and acclaimed since its release by critics and film scholars, the fact that the shot-for-shot remake was so derived upon release is, to Ty West, a fascinating result of this particular experiment, since Van Sant took a great film and copied this completely. So yeah, a lot of what people think of it now is like, it's pretty fucking interesting.
Yeah. Did you read or hear Gus Van Sant's what he was like talked about it on Mark Maron's podcast?
No, what did he say?
Because it's like there's quite interesting, like going into full detail of like how it came up. So yeah, this is kind of long, but since the whole reason behind it, I think the process of doing it was the learning. It wasn't necessarily the result. It wasn't really about learning about Hitchcock. It was more that during the 90s, the joke about the executives was that they would rather make a sequel than they would an original piece because there was less risk. They would rather continue a story that's already known in the public, and they were really searching for some way to do that. Now they've found out like comics is the way to do that, but back in the 90s, they hadn't found that yet. When I did Drugstore Cowboy, which was they made in 1989, I was all of a sudden meeting with the heads of studios because they knew the actors would work with me. Therefore, if they got me on their movie, they could get the actor they wanted. So it was less about me than it was about the actors. During one of the meetings, Casey Silver at Universal brought in all of his vice presidents, and one guy was head of the library and said, in the library, we have old films you could remake. We have scripts that haven't been made yet that you can make. And it just reminded me of that thing they wanted to do, which is remake something. And I said, what you guys haven't done is try to take a hit and remake it exactly, rather than remake it and put a new spin on it, just remake it for real, because I'd never seen that done yet as an experiment. The whole thing seemed experimental to me anyway, so I thought, why not? And they laughed. They thought it was silly, ridiculous, absurd, and they left. They said, won't be doing that. And then it says, as it turns out, being nominated for Best Director Oscar changed their tune very quick. It says, every time I would meet with Casey, I would bring it up, and I locked in on Psycho. I'm not sure why Psycho, but it just seemed like the movie that would work the best. I would bring it up again, and they would laugh again, and then later when we did Good Will Hunting, and it did really well at the box office, it also got nominated for 9 Oscars or something. But what they like to do the week before the Oscars happen is they like to get new deals in place with the people that are nominated, because as soon as you win, they've got your movie saying they can lean over to their buddies at the Oscars and say, we've got that guy's next movie. Then they forget that they have it after the night's over. So they were trying to make a deal with me, and I had a deal with Paramount. I had a deal at some other studio, and my agent was saying, Universal really wants to do a deal with you. What have you got for them? And I was like, Universal. Oh yeah. Tell them Psycho, frame by frame, new cast, in color. That's the idea. And then the agent calls back and says they think that's fantastic. So all of a sudden they were in.
I wish it was good now. You know?
Yeah.
Like it just seems so interesting. Fucking Vince Vaughn, man.
Yeah.
Fucking Vince Vaughn. Nice.
And then, Danny Elfman was like, don't do this. They'll kill you. He'll kill me. Everyone. The critics. Everybody that loves Psycho will kill you. And then Danny Elfman ended up doing
a lot of the music.
The score. Yeah.
Well, I got some dumb IMDb trivia to close out the Psycho 98 discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Norman's first scene, where he and Marion meet, was Vince Vaughn's first day shooting. He was very nervous and could hardly contain the nervous energy his character is to portray on screen. Viewing the dailies for that day, it was plainly obvious Vaughn's performance wouldn't do. Director Gus Van Sant quickly deciding on reshooting his first day. However, rather than blame the performance for the requisite reshoots, Van Sant told the producers he didn't like the motel room keys affixed to the wall at the desk register and wanted them altered. So Vince Vaughn, they knew he was bad from day one.
It was nice of him, though.
Yeah, and according to the Psycho Movies website, some die-hard Hitchcock fans boycotted the movie during the world premiere in LA with picket signs. It is often considered by many to be the worst remake of any film ever made, says the... So that's more a dumb the Psycho Movies website than a dumb IMDb trivia thing. But I love that. I love that they're like, yeah, it's the worst. Everyone thinks it's the worst one. Everyone thinks it's the worst one. Richard, we talk about titles a lot on this podcast, and I've got nothing to say about the Psycho titles, not really.
Well, then let's move on.
I do want to talk about taglines and I think maybe with a horror franchise, this maybe should be a regular segment on horror franchise episodes, because a movie can be made by its tagline. So I've got all 6 taglines for you here. Some of them are unnotable. Some of them I think are really cool. So the original Psychos had a whole bunch of like, don't spoil it, you're not allowed in late, etc., etc. But there's another one that was a new and altogether different screen excitement, which is
I love old school taglines. It's just like, wow. Like the idea that is actually enough to sell someone on it.
Yeah, exactly. Psycho 2 is, it's 22 years later and Norman Bates is coming home, which isn't bad.
The night he came home.
Yep. Psycho 3 is Norman Bates is back to normal, but mother's off her rocker again. Bates Motel was Norman Bates may be gone, but his motel lives on. Psycho 4 The Beginning was before the terror can end, see how it all began. And in what might be one of my favourite taglines of all time, the Psycho remake tagline is, check in, relax, take a shower. That's like the best thing about the film. The poster's really cool as well. It's like a bloody hand on a shower curtain. Again, it's like something that only works because it's a remake and it's got like all of that stuff sitting there.
Baked in,
All right, now it's time for our segment called Meeting of the Elders, which is where if you donate to our Cult Elder tier over on patreon.com/cultpopshow, you will get invited to a secret little room in our Discord called Cult Elders, where you can tell us your thoughts about the film. Richard, do you want to run through the Psycho thoughts? They start a bit up from where I...
So Dan from Bates Motel said, ignore this if you've already talked about it on the pod, but is this the first shot-for-shot remake you've covered? If not, what struck you about this attempt? I'm looking at... It's definitely the first one we've covered, but if I'm looking... There's Funny Games I know was remade.
Yeah.
And I've seen... I can't remember if I've seen both versions, but there's a movie called LOL. Just hit my desk.
I've seen LOL.
Yeah, and I think I might have seen both versions.
I haven't seen the Miley Cyrus one. I've seen the
it was a French film that was remade with Miley Cyrus, but I remember there's a scene in the American, like there was a scene in both films. It was a shop remake where the mother and teenage daughter are having a bath together, and it's one of these things that, like, you know, in Europe, it's like, yeah, well, you know, whatever. Like, that's how they do things in France. And then in the American version, I was like, that's weird. It just doesn't translate. Apparently, The Omen 2006 is almost a shot-for-shot remake as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Interesting.
And there's the Let Me In, Let the Right One In.
Is that shot-for-shot? I feel like it's like...
this is just according to TV Tropes.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
the Wikipedia page wasn't very helpful. It's just like Shrek retold.
Yeah. But yeah, it's interesting because, yeah, I mean, we sort of already talked about it, but it's like, yeah, it should work, and but I've never heard of one that really works.
Well, I don't think the Funny Games ones are like that's just a difficult movie. So I don't know if it's the reason people will be complaining will be about the remake aspect.
Yeah. And then bless my
very fun psycho-themed usernames this week, gang.
Has said, when I was college, I had a creative writing professor that offered us a thought experiment. If you have an original artwork and then some heathen made a forgery that is exactly the same as the original, down to the atoms, what does that say about the intrinsic value of art? An example of this would be right-clicking and saving an NFT. While the Psycho remake is not a down-to-the-atom remake, it is shot-for-shot. It tries its best to recreate the original, but often thought to be worse in just about every way. It brings to mind that thought experiment. Something about the original film, whether it was the little touches Hitchcock made, or the acting, or really just some inexplicable aspect of the nature of art that somehow makes it inferior. So I ask... do you think someone watching the remake without knowledge of the original would notice how it isn't a very good film? Is there bias in knowing it is a bit of a half-hearted copy of a classic? and what makes it worse. Additionally, does the remake hold exceptional value as an example of the nature of art in general? I think it does, and I think that in some ways it is a somewhat important film and what it can teach us about what makes art good. Yeah, 100% agree on that last point, that it's like, there needs to be at least one Psycho 1998 in existence and ever.
Yeah.
I think that they would notice it's not a very good film.
I think so too. I think particularly Vince Vaughn's performance is like bad, even if you're not comparing it.
Yeah. But it would be a fascinating thing to show this to someone who with no knowledge of Psycho. I think that any flaws that you can forgive in the original Psycho, because the rest of the film is so good, are going to be so much more glaring.
Oh my god, I just totally had an incredibly relevant memory pop into my head. I think the first thing I ever saw of Psycho when I was like 10 or 8 between 8 to 10 was the final scene of the 1998 remake. Because I remember seeing Vince Vaughn and hearing the I wouldn't even swat a fly thing. And then like months later was answering some kind of quiz and had to like answer the question, what horror movie is about a guy that turns into a fly? And I was like, it's Psycho, because he talks about the fly at the end.
That's great. Dan from Bates Motel said, Psycho is such a bona fide classic, but the reason I've seen all 4 films of this franchise is that my film teacher in high school decided to show us Psycho, Psycho 2, Psycho 3, and the remake. He really loves showing us sequels of classics in order to appreciate aspects of films that aren't classic. I absolutely love the opening sequence of 3 with the There Is No God line delivery living in my head rent-free ever since. Huge fan of Psycho 2, and that was also a big factor in me giving chances to films that sound like they might not be good. Because who knows? Maybe I'm missing out on a Psycho 2. Shout out to Vincent Valiatis of the Lighters. He showed us all the 4 Alien movies that existed at the time.
Also showed us. Presumably that's his professor.
The teacher. Dan from Bates Motel also said, I find it interesting also how Psycho spans Anthony Perkins' entire career and sadly marks his decaying health. I really wish he could have had a happy life with Tab Hunter or Grover Dale. The sad parallels with Perkins' own traumatic childhood is chilling personally. Also, conversion therapy can fuck off. Agreed. Anyway, I'd like my haiku reviews to be read for the first 2 Psycho films. Note, I wrote 3 haikus for the first one. So 4.5 stars and a heart for this. Psycho, odd to revisit after watching new slashers, so methodical. Ending, could be transphobic, but takes the time to point out Norman isn't trans. Explained. As for the last speech, nobody needs to Google Psycho End Explained. And then Psycho 2, 4 stars. Surprisingly great. I want Meg Tilly's sweaters. Are you my mother?
Nice work.
If it Brent's We Can Kill It, who hasn't updated his name from the Predator.
Let's update it for him. What about a Brent's best friend as his mother? You can actually literally add it.
I'm doing it now, yeah.
The mod powers.
Friend is his mother. Is his mot? Okay, there we go. it runs out of characters. This is his 4-star review of Psycho. We all think we're doing something original, but really we're all just playing at Hitchcock motifs. Yeah,
I agree. Watching Psycho, I was like, oh my god, it's all just Hitchcock. It all comes back to Hitchcock.
Dimitri says, I watched Psycho once in high school and was like, oh yeah, that was pretty good, and I've never bothered to revisit it. However, I do know that according to Seth Rogen on Movie Fights, the 1998 remake is the first mainstream movie to show a butthole, so that's cool if you're into that sort of thing. Are you?
Into buttholes?
Yeah.
I certainly wouldn't have said I was a number of years ago. I don't know if the butthole is something like I'm interested in on a visual level.
Right.
But I think on other levels, I might be more interested in it.
What levels? On an olfactory level?
Yeah, on a factory level. What's the next? What's the last? What
to do with scent?
Okay. Oh, okay. Well, no, not that either. But what's the next one?
Scotty can open doors now, has said. My
Is that a Jurassic Park username?
I think Scotty's last name is
It is Door,
Yeah.
but like, is this a nickname that hasn't been changed since the Jurassic Park episode?
Who knows? Scotty says, my film school, like most film schools, made us watch the first one. I went into expecting a horror, as for some reason people made me think that that's what it was. I mean, I would argue it is, but to my surprise, it was more of like a giant practical joke. I laughed pretty hard at the end. Not sure if that was the intended reaction, but for some reason the idea that this is one of the most studied films of all time has this weird as fuck ending just cracked me up. Like, the psychiatrist is such a smug fuck. Never saw the remake or the others. I bet they're not as funny. I think Robert Forster's performance as the psychiatrist is much better than... There is a smugness in the original. And Robert Forster's more... It adds a bit more gravitas to it.
That's so funny. That's such a unique perspective that Scotty has on Psycho, that he's acting like is the general opinion, but it's like no one else thinks this movie is funny. Scotty, what are you talking about? All right, meeting adjourned. We're going to move on now to continue the franchise, which is where we pitch our own continuations of the franchise, but there are a few that already exist, or sort of already exist. Outside of Robert Bloch's Psycho 2, the author also wrote a third novel in 1990 called Psycho House, which is set 10 years after Norman Bates' death, and the Bates Mansion and Motel are both bought as tourist attractions before a series of mysterious murders begin to take place. And in 2016, a fourth book was written by Chet Williamson called Psycho Sanitarium, which took place between the first and second novel and recounted the events which took place in a state hospital for the criminally insane where Bates is a patient. There are also several documentaries about the film, some of which I've already mentioned, and also some interesting art installations, including 24-Hour Psycho, which is a slowed-down version of the film which takes a day to watch. It's at 2 frames per second. And a mashup of the original and the remake, which appeared on Steven Soderbergh's Extension 765 website, entitled, get this, Psychos. Presumably the S on the end is a $sign.
Yeah, I did know about that, actually, yeah. I forgot, yeah.
Psycho's most notable modern outing, though, would be the 2013 TV series, also titled Bates Motel, which is developed by Carlton Cuse, of the other guy from Lost that no one talks about as much as Damon Lindelof. Other people were also involved, but he's the name I recognize. Have you seen any of this show?
I have not, no.
No? It ran for 5 seasons until 2017. Starred Freddie Highmore as Norman Bates and Vera Farmiga as Norma Bates. I've seen, my mum watched it all when I moved back to Christchurch, so I saw quite a lot of it. Freddie Highmore is so good, and it's weird that he's kind of like dipped below the line in terms of fame since he was a child actor.
Is he in The Good Doctor as well?
He is. He's the titular Good Doctor. And he's really good in that as well. Bates Motel is set in modern day, and the entire show is basically a lead up to the events of Psycho, which transpire in the final season. Would you like some spoilers for the show?
Okay.
Spoilers for Bates Motel. So Norman murders his mother at the end of the show's 4th season, but Vera Farmiga stays on as main cast member, tormenting Norman as a ghost/vision. Marion Crane is played by Rihanna in the series, in the final season, and actually survives the show. The famous shower scene is subverted. It's included, but in this version, Norman actually stabs Sam Loomis, who's written as more of a scumbag in this adaptation.
Interesting.
So there's some cool stuff, and it's one of those things where it's like, I'm sure like in the middle of Bates Motel, like season 3 of Bates Motel must be like unrecognizable as a Psycho story. And it's just like they're just playing with the characters they have set up and the storylines they have set up, and like whenever, like it's the same with like how there's like the Alfred show at Batman's Butler. How it's like, what am I going to care about this if it's literally without Batman? And I felt similar about Gotham and stuff as well.
And just remember, that's called Pennyworth What's the show
The
called?
Origins of Batman's Butler.
Yeah.
They retitled it recently.
So funny.
Yeah, it's great. So yeah, that I have seen enough of that show to speak to its sort of varying quality. I remember at the time, came out the same time as or around the same time as Hannibal, which was, I mean, Norman Bates and Hannibal Lecter are, I think, somewhere they are written as the second and first.
Yeah, the
best
AFI
villains of all
100
time.
films, 100 films.
Yeah, so there were, jokes about a crossover between Bates Motel and Hannibal and things like that. I remember watching the first episode when it came out, having not seen Psycho, strangely enough, and thinking it wasn't very good, but Freddie Highmore is really good in it.
Wow.
Yeah, so that's the big continue the franchise thing. That's how Psycho exists in 2020, whatever, is that show, basically.
Yeah.
I have a continue the franchise I'm actually quite excited about. Do you have one? Would you like to go
I have
first?
one I'm not very excited about. I have one I think is stupid.
Okay, you tell me that first, and then I'll end us on a high.
Well, I would love to see we've seen the shot-for-shot remake. Let's make a shot-for-shot all female gender-swapped remake.
All right, nice. And it's called Psycho Woman.
Yeah. Let's see. Some 28-year-old actresses that could play Dakota Fanning.
She's who? Norman Bates.
Norman Bates.
Okay.
Or Olivia Cook.
Olivia Cook shows up in everything.
She's in Bates Motel.
Yeah, she is. That's right.
Yeah, there you go.
Who plays Who am I looking for? Gabby Hoffman. How old's Gabby Hoffman? She is 40, but I think she'd be a good female Norma Bates. Okay, my continue the franchise is actually not too dissimilar from what you said. But somewhat inspired by the somewhat disappointing Gus Van Sant remake, I was thinking about how Psycho is kind of the perfect movie to remake. It's sort of what he said before in that Mark Maron quote. It has such distinct sets, characters, and story structure that there's almost a theatrical quality to it that feels like it lends itself to being interpreted by different directors and artists and actors and things, So I'm pitching a 7-part project, Richard, called Psychopaths. Which will see 7 different directors given the keys to their own Psycho remakes. And I don't know, maybe these come out every 2 months over a year and a bit, or maybe they come out once a year for 7 years. Film buffs often theorize as to what it would be like to see a different director's approach to the same material, and I think Psycho is iconic enough that it's a perfect control sample or frame of reference. It's not too alienating that it's too specific for different directors' visions. So each director would be able to change, swap, alter anything they like. They can make it unrecognizable if they want to. They can use the exact same script or reinterpret it entirely. They can even change the title if they want. There are no rules. It's just the mandate. You are making a Psycho remake. Here are the 7 directors that I think would be great. The 7 psychopaths that I think would be great to bring on board. Some of them I think are really obvious, and you're like, of course. But some of them I'm quite proud of. Okay, so first and foremost, Jordan Peele has recently spoken about how he thinks Alfred Hitchcock is the greatest horror director of all time. I think he's also talked about how he doesn't want to make movies where black characters aren't the protagonists.
Yeah.
So I think a
Black Psycho.
A black psycho, black cast would be cool. And I think his movies evoke Hitchcock as well. So I think it would be really interesting to see Jordan Peele's Psycho. Lynn Ramsey, who did You Were Never Really Here, and we need to talk about Kevin. I think I'll trying to be diverse and get diverse voices, and she's an active female director who makes this kind of film anyway. I imagine it would be a lot less fun in a good way than the original, a lot less pulpy and a lot more down to earth and a lot more sad. Bong Joon-ho, third director, right? So after Parasite and everything, I think similar to Jordan Peele, it's what is a Korean Psycho look like when it's literally filmed in Korea, and what's that kind of vibe? And I think I've only seen a couple of his films, but I think, again, it lends itself to the material. All right, a little less famous, but I really would love to see it. Taylor Sheridan, Wind River director. I think this is like a modern approach that could be really cool to see, like a just with new inventive filmmaking ideas that he I think embodies.
So we've got Black Psycho, Girl Psycho, Korean Psycho, Western Psycho.
Western Psycho, nice. And then because you've got to M. Night Shyamalan, of course. You've got to. Like this will be the worst one, but what does it look like? You know, what
Twisty
does M. Night
Psycho.
Shyamalan's Psycho look like? And the next one I've got is the Safdie brothers. I think could make an interesting Psycho.
Stressful
and at
Psycho.
first I was like, because Adam Sandler would be an interesting Norman Bates, and then I was like, oh, Benny Safdie is the best. Would be the best Norman Bates. Benny Safdie would be an incredible Norman Bates. And like,
and
if
then
they had,
Adam Sandler would be a good one, and then doing his like for
oh
Norman.
my blood. But yeah,
you would have even heard of that.
I think the Safdie, like if they approach it the same way they approach Uncut Gems with making a script that doesn't feel like a script, then it's this interesting thing that it's chaotic and it's stressful in a way that the original maybe isn't, is a little bit more theatrical with. And finally, the seventh director I would get on board for this would be Scott Derrickson, maybe the lesser like known of the ones, but I don't know. So he did The Black Phone, he did Doctor Strange, he did one of the Hellraiser movies, and I think what
he did like Sinister and stuff as well.
Yeah, and what attracted me to giving him one of the spots was that I think on Twitter he's demonstrating like he often demonstrates like a really good understanding of horror, and he's also probably makes the most like generic-ish, crowd-pleasing, like classic. Well, not even classic, like modern.
Well, it's like what you would consider like a modern.
Yeah. So what is it?
Yeah.
So what does a modern Psycho look like? And those are my 7 directors.
And especially since the Adam
movies.
Wingard isn't as good now. Can't give it to him.
Right, yeah, exactly.
Nice. So that's the 7 Psycho paths.
And if this goes well, why don't we do this with other movies? You know, like it's such an interesting experiment. I think Gus Van Sant is like, I'm just so curious about that movie, despite not really liking it, and so yeah.
I love it.
Now we've got to do a little thing we love doing called Rank That Franchise. We're over on Letterboxd.com. On the Cult Popture page, we've got a list where we rank every franchise we've ever watched, and it is organized by the first, representing the first movie in a franchise represents the whole franchise. So I'm going to add Psycho to this list. Where do you have any gut feelings where it should go? It's similar. Yep.
Yeah. No. Yeah. What were you gonna say?
Similar to Alien. Not as nowhere near as good as Alien, but like I feel similar about it in the sense that like I don't think the terribleness isn't actually that potent or that. Like the lowest this film franchise gets, I don't think is as bad or as
well. I mean, like Jaws
as
is still like decently high above the Nymphomaniac.
Jaws should not be above the Nymphomaniac constant. I don't know why it is.
Jaws is real good. The first one.
Yeah, but the sequels aren't, and we're ranking it as a franchise. I don't know. I regret putting it that high. All right, so if I go to somewhere that is where is the Nymphomaniac? Okay, there's Nymphomaniac. Do we reckon it's above the Nymphomaniac constant?
I don't reckon it's very far away from it, to be honest.
I think it is better though. I think if the Nymphomaniac constant is half good, half bad, I think this is like one really good thing and then interesting stuff, which makes for good franchise watching.
Mm-hmm.
Let's go above the Rugrats movie, but below High School Musical.
Okay.
Sweet. So that is number 72. The 72nd best franchise we've ever watched is the Psycho franchise. You can check that out at Letterboxd.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got one more thing to do before we head on out, Richard, and that is reveal what our next franchise is for the next film franchise, Fortnights. It is still Spooktober. This episode will, I believe, be released on Halloween.
On Spookoween itself.
And it's up to the patrons. The patrons voted and suggested and voted on what spooky franchise they want us to cover. Richard, before you tell us what has won the vote, I would just like to tell people that if they have enjoyed this podcast, please consider supporting us. You can do that by following us at Instagram or Twitter at Cult Popture, and you can also join the Discord where we chat all things cult popture and pop culture, and we'd love to know your thoughts on our thoughts about Psycho. And also we've got a Patreon, patreon.com/cultpopture. If you loved our thoughts so much that you want to literally pay for them, you can go over there where you get all sorts of exclusive content, including extra podcasts. You get to do these votes. You get to contribute to the discussion in the episode. It's a lot of fun. Richard, what is the next Fortnights franchise?
I have not been following it. Can I get the 2-factor authentication code?
Is that what that buzz in my pocket was?
Yeah, it was.
I know what it is. Do you want me to just say it?
I'm pretty sure I know what it is, but I want to.
Wolf. Yeah. And I didn't have to bleep that out because it's going to change the next time. It'll expire.
Yeah, you're right. Everything expires. Even us.
We all go a little mad sometimes.
Yeah, yes, that's true. Oh.
Why are you logging out of Patreon?
It does. I'm not.
Just stay logged in.
It's not me. Alrighty. We've got a bunch of comments here, but it appears that in the lead is Spooky Family Guy.
Not a film franchise. Cancelled.
Alright, let's go with the next best thing, which is Child's Play / Chucky.
All right, this has been a long time coming. I feel like this is the longest we've ever waited to get a franchise. This
is the last one.
Do you reckon?
This is it.
In what sense?
This is the last episode of the podcast.
Not even Chucky, like the Psycho episode. You're just
yeah.
No, I mean, I feel like we've been waiting to get Child's Play for years. I remember 2019 thinking we were going to get given Child's Play sooner or later.
Yeah, because the new one came out.
Yeah, I remember standing in a gas station and thinking, oh, we'll probably get Child's Play next week. So how many Child's Play movies are there?
Appears that there's 8.
Nice. I'm super excited. I've wanted to watch these for a while. I've only seen The Bride of Chucky when I was very young, and I've seen the end of the new TV series, which I thought was really good.
Yeah, I've heard it's quite good.
So this will be awesome and very spooky. So get ready for that next week, everybody. Stay tuned for the post-credit scene, which will come at you after this music stops. And time for a franchise-appropriate sign-off. Something I didn't realize was my trademark until I realized it was. Let me think. A podcaster's best friend
is his co-host.
All right, welcome along to the post-credit scene, everybody. This is a segment at the end of each episode where if you donate $5 or more over at patreon.com/cultpopture, you get to give us something to talk about in the post-credits scene. Richard, what is it?
This comes to us from Randy Rubright, who says, "Hey AJ, hi Richard."
Hi.
Okay. Weird that you gave me hi and AJ hey.
Randy Rubright emailed us 5 years ago, and it was one of the first big interactions we'd had from a fan, and it was a touching email. And Randy, I still remember your email, and it was a big watershed moment for me.
So Randy says, "I've always loved to cook, and the pandemic gave me a lot of time to experiment in the kitchen since my partner was an essential worker and my lab was temporarily shut down. Since I was now the primary foodsmith, I was looking at anywhere and everywhere for dinner ideas and would sometimes take inspiration from movies / shows we were watching. It was rarely anything prominently featured, but sometimes if a character sat down for a meal or someone was eating something in passing, I'd go, fuck, I should make that. Has there ever been a meal in a non-food-centric film or show, so no Chef, Ratatouille, but honestly, if you want to include food-centric movies, go right ahead. I'm not going to sue. that made you so interested that you sought out to try or even make it yourself? If so, did it live up to your expectations? Because I know I've definitely made some shitty dinners. As an example, the prison sauce from Goodfellas had way too many onions, though, and honestly, I didn't enjoy it as much as my normal homemade tomato sauce recipe. I tried a razor with the garlic, and it for sure doesn't dissolve in the pan in just a little bit of oil. It fries like, well, garlic. I still rough chop my garlic for most things, but I actually do use his technique now for pasta olio aglio. It works super well for that, but my god, the meat combo for the meatballs does kick ass with the veal, pork, and beef. I don't make them anymore because of moral veal obligations, but the time we tried them was fantastic.
So, I don't know if it's from a specific thing, but I've had a lifelong obsession that still has gone unsatisfied to this day with a really good sandwich. I really...
yeah.
I really love sandwiches. I have these conversations with my flatmate where like all I want is like a good sandwich, and whenever you go to buy a sandwich from a place, there's always like something they've put something in it I don't want, and I presume it's like Scooby-Doo, like Shaggy eating like a fucking tall ass sandwich, but Shaggy's a vegetarian, and I'm specifically looking for mainly meat and cheese in my sandwich, and so. This is something that, like, whenever I see a sandwich in a cartoon, my interest is always piqued because I'm like, what is in that sandwich?
Interesting. You're coming out to Auckland soon, and I have a sandwich shop I've been wanting to take you to for fucking ages.
What's it called?
Pastrami and rye.
Ah, sounds amazing. I had a sandwich in London. I had a Reuben sandwich in London. That was delicious. There are some there are some sandwich places in Christchurch. There's Serious Sandwich, which is really good, and New York Deli, which is really good. But they're a tier above the sandwich I want at all times. They're like gourmet, fancy Subway sandwiches. I want something that is like fresher than Subway and more better ingredients, but not $20 for a sandwich.
Yeah, this place, pastrami rye is a bit more expensive, but it's a bit on the expensive side. But they have really nice pecan pie as well, which you can't really get in New Zealand. But yeah, the Reuben's really good. The pastrami and rye is really good. They do a lot like good the breakfast baguette with like bacon, and it was just like bacon, egg, and a baguette with like rocket barbecue sauce, and it was that was when I would work a 7-day stretch of work on the Monday. After that, so I would work like Monday to Sunday. And then Monday, Tuesday off. Then Monday morning was always like my little treat. I would get Uber Eats, pastrami and rye when I lived nearby.
Let's do it.
In terms of things I like going to the States was like a massive trying a lot of stuff I'd seen on TV, and it, like nothing super specific, but I mean, I guess the most like specific one was that we like went out of our way to try White Castle, and it's just from Harold and Kumar go to White Castle.
Right. Was it good?
And no, it's terrible. White Castle's so bad.
Really?
Yeah, White Castle is
what are we
garbage.
What are we comparing it to?
Fast
food. No, but like, does it taste? Is it like more like McDonald's than Burger King or anything like that?
No, so it's a different ball game. It's because they're sliders, and so it's like.
Yeah.
The patty, the bun, paper thin patty, with a hole in the middle of it, an onion thrown at it, and no sauce whatsoever. Just the driest fucking thing. Because it's not. We went to the West Coast, and White Castle isn't really so much on the West Coast, but there is a White Castle in Vegas, and so I was like, oh, we have to go here while we're here, and it was just garbage. Oh, we saw White Castle like frozen sliders in the frozen section of the supermarkets, and it's like, honestly, if you're in the States and you want to try White Castle for whatever reason, just get the frozen one. It will taste identical. Like it tastes like it's from frozen.
That's crazy.
If you're baked though, oof.
Oh,